Good evening. It is 6 o'clock and we will begin. Do we need to... Okay, if everybody can please sign into the system for speakers list.
Good evening. Just letting you know I'm here and I'm signed in.
Thank you, Donna. Okay. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public session of the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Halton District School Board on January 17, 2024. Please be advised that the meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed on the hdsb.ca and on the HDSB YouTube channel. We have trustees attending both in person and online. Online, we have Trustee Daniele and Trustee Ahmed will be joining us shortly. In person, we have Trustee Bryden, Rosha, Baxter, Amos, Chair Collard, Trustee Zhang, and Shuttleworth. And Director Ennis, will you please let us know which staff are in attendance tonight?
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Oliver. We have the relevant staff for tonight's meeting in the room, and one will be joining us online.
Thank you. And we now have Trustee Gray joining us as well. Let us begin with the acknowledgement of traditional lands, and Margot will do that.
Thank you. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern tradition of many First Nation and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawaddaron, the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather here today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, water, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Trustee Zhang, would you like to move a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes, I move. Thank you.
Thank you. And Trustee we don't need to do that. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I would have.
If there are no objections, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. Any declarations of possible conflict of interest for tonight's meeting? Seeing none, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from our Committee of the Whole meeting of November 22nd, 2023. Are you ready for the question? Are there any objections to approving the minutes? Are there any? Oh, sorry, we got to move that first. Yes, Trustee Bryden, would you like to move the motion to approve the minutes?
I would.
Thank you. Are there any objections to approving the minutes? Seeing none, minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Okay, we have a number of discussion items tonight. We have 4 superintendents who will be presenting to us on various policies and governance procedures and administrative procedures. So we'll begin with item 3.1, policy and procedure updates, and that will be Superintendent Shaw's on trustee expenses, and over to you.
All right, good evening, everybody. All right, so I seem to be it for the next 3 items, so you get to enjoy me for a few minutes. All right, so trustee expenses, governance procedure. Just draw your attention to the last page only. I haven't touched anything else. So on the last page, the Schedule 1, computer equipment and peripherals, we're striking out. We've removed from the list the XPS series laptops. The reason for that is my team runs very, very lean, and it's difficult for them to service different types of computers, different models, and different brands. We're making the same decisions with staff, superintendents, principals, vice principals, and so on. So I've made the decision we need to streamline our support services. It's too difficult. So we're removing the XPS series from the Dell line for the time being. We'll see how that goes. We may revisit this down the road. They're much more complex to fix than the Latitude series. With mobile devices, the same thing, same idea. We did offer the Samsung S23, S24, whatever year. We've removed that. So for our staff who are Android users, the only choice now is a Pixel, the different variations of the Pixel, to match the iPhone models, where we've removed Samsung off the list. So those are the two changes there. I will give just trustees perhaps a heads up that we are looking at MacBooks. So our staff are not permitted to purchase MacBooks for their devices as their administrator devices, right? So a principal is not able to buy a Mac. They get Dells. They can use their PD funds for Macs, but they're not supported. The PD devices that they buy with their PD funds are not supported by the board. Macs are tremendously more expensive and more complex for my team to maintain. So this is something we probably need to look at down the road, looking at the MacBook Airs and Pros on this Schedule 1 as well, because if you have an issue with your device, you will look to my team to support you, and they don't have the Mac expertise, and we run too lean to support too many different brands and models. So just a heads up, it's not on the list yet, but it probably is something we need to discuss. So that's it for that one. Any questions?
Are there any questions on this? Seeing none. Oh, yep. We have Tanya, please.
Yeah, so through the chair. I had a question, and I'm trying to see if you replied to my email or not. And it was regarding the $90 or $80, 80 plus HST for internet. So my question is that amount being looked at?
Yeah, so the only thing I looked at was that Schedule 1 with the two types of devices.
Right.
I think we just revised the Schedule 1 a year ago or something. I'm not sure, something like that. So I think if you want to revisit that, I don't know what the process is, but I think it goes through. That wasn't what I was doing. I wasn't focused on that.
Okay, so that was outside of your
It
scope.
was, correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
Okay, Amy.
Thank you. So the Schedule 1 costs of things should probably be looked at annually, specifically because the variance in prices of operating these devices can't be determined 4 years in advance for the term of a trustee. So it's probably wise to look at them annually. And I think Gord had started down that path, and then we had a pandemic and everything blew out of the water. But yeah, I think Tanya's got a good point there. The cost of things, we never know what they're going to be in the next year.
Yeah, point well taken. I seem to be on an annual review of this Schedule 1 anyway, because I made revisions last year and I'm back again this year, so I'll probably be back again next year. So, and maybe we can look at that at that point if you like. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, if there are no other questions on this topic, let's move on to the next topic, which is 3.12, cybersecurity policy.
Right. Okay. So before you've got the board policy. So I did take Trustee Rocha's suggestion with this one. So this is you're named in your honor now. I think this is the cybersecurity and data protection policy, not just the cybersecurity policy. So, and it's again, a point well taken, because significant portion of the admin procedure deals with data protection. It's not just the cybersecurity piece. So it was an excellent question. So I'll just, in the policy, just draw your attention to the second page, the guiding principles around cybersecurity, cyber and online safety, which includes my colleague Jen Fowler, and Safe Schools. Obviously, we're shared responsibility, digital and online privacy, so you can see the personal information, personal health information, and other information. And then below that, how do we deliver on that? You'll see the different, there's a governance piece, there's a strategy piece, there's a piece around standards and procedures and guidelines, and also the cyber protection assurance, which is sort of our commitment to update this, on an ongoing basis as things continue to evolve and, threats continue to evolve over time. So, I'll take any questions about the policy, and then we'll get into the AP where the real meat is. So,
I see there's a question from Jean, followed by Robbie.
Thank you very much through the Vice Chair. I noted at the top of this board policy that the review date is January 2028. It seems to me that there's so many moving pieces and so quickly. I wonder if this is a policy that should be outside all other policies and reviewed on an annual basis. I just question that, because I think your field brings new information and changes every year, and I just would like to know that this policy is always considered for review.
yes, through the Vice Chair, it is a source of joy every year. So I concur. If you look at the AP, in fact, it says the review date is 1 year. The policy should say the same. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Jean. That's an excellent observation. And over to you, Robbie.
Thank you. The content of this policy seems reasonable. The format is bugging me. The items in the list of A to H include various shall statements, which to me are the policy statements and not the guiding principles. And just in terms of the way the document is laid out, I would love to see that switched around. The question of the template for writing these policies is actually on my list in the governance document review committee to look at. So if you would like to bring suggestions there, that's possible. If you would like to modify and come back to board, that'd be great.
Through the Vice Chair, I'd love to give you my feedback. Carolina has heard my feedback. The new format of the APs and the policies, they look better, like the font anyway, but they're a nightmare to work with. And so we've had many discussions about the policy and AP formats, and I appreciate your concern. I share your thoughts.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. So just a quick question. You referenced working with Jen Fowler on this. I'm wondering if there's also an audit role on this, and perhaps a tie into Roxana's team as well. And how would the cooperation between the different portfolios be delineated in the policy itself? Or should you just be doing that in the AP?
Through the Vice Chair, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't. I think the policy is the policy. It should probably be identified through the AP, would be my suggestion. Certainly for Roxana's team, actually all the corporate SOs, Sari and so on, they all had eyes on the AP prior to, because there are procurement pieces in there. There's pieces about vendors and third parties and so on. And then the work around the cooperation with Safe Schools isn't really mentioned in the AP, but we do the work anyway. So like just outside of the AP, it just occurs. Yeah.
If I may, I'm just curious as to, administrative procedure from the procedural perspective, people that are trying to accomplish what's in the AP would probably want to know that, the impacts to the various different rules, so that if they have questions, they know who to go to and not necessarily go straight to you if it's tangential. I'm trying to make it easier for the user to follow the procedure.
Yeah, no, I get where you're going. I think with the AP, it falls on information services shoulders. So there's pieces about privacy and so on and online security, but we don't get into the safe school side of things. Like, it doesn't talk about progressive discipline of students. It doesn't talk about those pieces, right? It's purely sort of the guidelines, the rails, the safeguards, the procedures, the standards. It doesn't get into the pieces. I could go through the AP for anywhere where it talks about vendors and contractors and reference facility services. I could, with the procurement pieces, go through that and reference business services, but I don't really think that's what our APs do. Like, I don't, because this is about setting the standards. It's not who you're going to call, right? So.
Yeah, sort of. But yeah, there's a bit of fuzzy area between that, and I know that probably exists in many of our procedures. It's just that this one seems to be so all encompassing, and you're going to be getting all the calls.
Yeah. So in parts, when we go through the AP, you'll notice, like, I think it's section 3, it actually says in collaboration with human resources. There's other sections where it talks about, like, where there's an exception that we will liaise with other departments as necessary. So spec ed and so on. So I think it's implied. Some cases it's explicit. I can make it more explicit, but I also don't want to tie our hands.
Yeah,
either,
no, that's fine. I just was curious because of the references to different departments that you made when you were discussing the policy. So forgive me for going down on a tangent, but I was just wondering how that would be operationalized. Thank you.
Any other questions on the cybersecurity and data protection policy? Seeing none, we will move on to our next item, which is administrative procedures, of which we have 15. I'll just say welcome to Trustee Ahmed and Superintendent Taha, who joined us a few minutes ago. Okay, on to cybersecurity, and I'm assuming data protection admin procedure. Jonathan, thank you.
Yes, the renamed cybersecurity and data protection admin procedure. Yes. Okay, so you will see. So this is we'll spend some time in this document. So you'll see the review date is January 2025, and then I imagine I will be back every year. I think it will change at least once every year, if not more. This is a fast evolving field with emerging threats and evolving technologies, and I think this is almost an organic, like dynamic document. I think it will live and shift in shape and depth and breadth as we move through, and will probably never settle. So we'll flip through. The first bit looks pretty familiar. We've got the guiding principles and the cyber strategy roadmap. If you go to the cyber, I think it's about 4 pages in, we talked about cyber risk management and what that involves, is sort of the broad scope of things. Section 2 is where we get into the real meat of the document. There you see the in collaboration with human resources. The onboarding and offboarding of staff is not something we excel at. Needs some work, device recovery, and what we call access revocation. So revoking your access when you leave the board for whatever reason. Section 3 is the cyber awareness and data protection training. So this is where we outline the sort of annual training that we're going to introduce for staff. You'll see there's a cybersecurity piece, a cyber safety piece, an online safety piece. Digital literacy and citizenship awareness for staff, but particularly for students, we do have an elementary matrix, if you will, for grades 1 through 8, and we have a secondary one as well for grades 9 through 12. That's under review right now, and I've asked folks to have a good hard look at artificial intelligence, where generative AI fits into that digital literacy continuum from elementary and particularly in our secondary schools, right? Where does it fit?
Point of order, please. May I ask a question? As we go through this document, is it helpful to you that we ask questions as we go, or would you rather have the questions all at the end?
Jean. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just had a question. I just wanted to be assured that occasional staff are involved in the this section of onboarding and training, this mandatory training that we want our staff to have.
Yeah, it's a great question. So through the vice chair. So there's several pieces to this. So mandatory. So training is training for all employees, all employee groups. So they'll have to do those pieces. The things like phishing campaigns and so on, they're also included with that. We did actually, the contract we signed, we missed them somehow. So we've had to add them, but they are included now. So they'll get the 4 tests per year. Yes, so they are part of all of the training, all of the education. MFA is a bit of a challenge because they don't have a dedicated work site because they move. And so if they're choosing to use the hard tokens, when we get to that point, they'll have to actually come to New Street to pick them up because we're not sending the tokens out in the courier, right? So that's a bit of a logistic issue that we can't get around, but they are certainly included, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I see Margot's next.
Thank you, Joanna. So my question kind of piggybacks off Jean's. So with that, when we're looking at occasional teachers or people that are coming into the school as supply, you know how you're talking about that principle of least privilege, so that when you go in, if you're not using board devices, you're on a different internet thing. Will those people have access to the school internet, or will they also be kicked onto the other one?
No, they should be fine. If they're able to authenticate, so they have authenticator or they use the token, they will be able to authenticate themselves. So that's good. And the device, they will either have their own device that has to be updated. If not, then they're over to the public site. But schools will probably give schools a handful of laptops to use with supply teachers as they come in to make sure they have the devices. Yeah.
I'm also just checking on teacher candidates as well. So people coming in from colleges that are working in our schools?
So they will probably have to have, that will be an interesting one because they won't have the tokens because it would be too fast, right? They're coming in and we won't be able to process. So they'll have to have authenticator, and then we'll have to know their names through, whether it's through HR, because I think the process did run through Marcia. Sorry, might be able to weigh in. Or somebody in HR. We used to get emails that we have a teacher candidate who's looking for a place, and we're, but my team will have to get that name so we can add them so that when they authenticate, we know who they are and they're eligible, right? Otherwise, they'll be on the public network, right? Which may not be a big deal, right? But ideally not.
Okay, I just want to check with you, Jonathan, that this is working for you, this kind of question.
Yeah, it's fine. The only risk is that we jump ahead into MFA and so on, which is like page
exactly.
9.
Is there anything that, so is there anything that you wanted to cover on where you left off, or are we, okay, so over to you, Robbie.
Noticing in the case of a leave secondment, your cut point is 12 months or less. And wondering if there's a reason for that. And basically what's in my head is that your most common leave is going to be parental leave, and that's now possible up to 18 months. And whether it's just logistically easier for you to set that at 18 months and not have to worry about taking back devices depending on whether someone chooses to go 15 months or 11 on their leave.
Yeah, so through the vice, it's a great question, and we've batted this around ad nauseum. We've been up to 2 years, we've been down to 6 months, we've been at, there's all different leaves. We also have people seconded to the ministry for a year or 2 years, and then they take so where that sweet spot is probably is more dependent on the type of leave, and we haven't gotten that granular yet. So that's one area where it's going to be fluid, I think, and we're going to be watching to see how manageable this is, right? Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out, though. Am I good to shut it? Okay. So I think we're on, I'm going to jump to section 5. So section 5 talks about cloud security in the network. That's where we're going to be moving as much as we can to the cloud with what we call SASE solutions, vendor hosted solutions, right? Rather than have things on site, on-prem. We had a bit of an issue last week where even our cloud hosted things like SmartFind all went down. We woke up in the morning and nothing worked. And so we know what the problem is. We've identified, we've had meetings, we've debriefed, we've learned the lessons and so on. And it was all around authentication. But that kind of error shouldn't happen with cloud hosted solutions because the schools are all directly liaising with the vendor, the application, say SmartFind or School Messenger, directly from the school to the cloud, and they're not running through JWS anymore. So we need to move to that. And we'll do it. There are some legacy systems that we have that are unable to move to the cloud, and so we'll have to secure those separately. You'll see on the following page, there's a reference to zero trust environments. And I mentioned when I spoke with you a week ago, that's the biggest shift for our board, moving to a position of zero trust, where you don't trust anybody and you don't trust anything, any device, unless the person can authenticate that they are who they are and they deserve to be on our network and accessible, able to access our software, our payroll, whatever it is. And the device that they're using is not going to present a security risk to the board when it joins our network, right? So it's got to be patched. It's got to be up to date. And if it can't, then it's over to the public Wi-Fi, okay? We do have situations, some have come to light recently as we automate our processes. We're finding out all sorts of surprises. And we do have unauthorized networks operating in some of our schools, and we need to shut those down. There's one high school that had a sort of an unauthorized network operating that the school had kind of set up as its own intranet kind of thing. And those sorts of things present security risks, and we have to close those down. So that's what that section refers to. On the next page, you have multi-factor authentication, everyone's favorite topic. So this is where we get into the authenticator app or the token. I don't know if I passed the token around in the past. Did I pass it around? So maybe I'll do that later. I'll just pass one around so you can see it. So staff have a choice. We're strongly encouraging them. I spoke to OSSTF branch presidents last night at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening and briefed them on where we're going, kind of the version I gave to you over 2 sessions, and strongly encouraged them to adopt Authenticator, right? And I know there are some questions about personal devices and needing them for work and all these things, but it is so much easier and so much safer to use the Authenticator app than it is to use the hardware token. Some folks don't have phones. Some people don't have phones with data. Yes, so those are exceptions. We've ordered tokens for those people who need them, who request them, but it is a significant cost to the board, and we have to recognize that. So we're strongly encouraging folks to use the Authenticator app whenever possible, but we do have an alternative. Then there's this section, the principle of least privilege, which we've touched on already. Then we get into my favorite topic, which is network segmentation. I presented last week, and I talked about how we're separating our network into different highways or different pipelines. So if you are a member of the public and you're able to get into you're in the public network, but you can't jump over into HR, you can't jump over into finance or something like that, okay? Approved devices I've already talked about, so only devices that are configured and managed through the board are going to be able to access our most sensitive data and applications. And if you don't meet the security standards, you're not going to be able to access those devices. And so for people who are used to bringing in their own devices, whatever they want to bring in, their Acer computer or their MacBook or their Lenovo or whatever it happens to be, and they want to just use whatever they are comfortable with, is going to present an issue for some of them moving forward if they want to access training modules or payroll or things like that, right? I'm going to skip to the privacy and data protection section on the following page, we have to recognize that we have 65,000 students in our care, the vast majority of whom are minors. We don't have consent from their parents and guardians to just sort of use any app we want and this and that, their personal information and so on. So we have to be cognizant of that. So a big section there. The data loss prevention section is interesting. We are discovering now that all sorts of things. We discovered a significant amount of data being drawn out, exfiltrated from one of our high schools just last night, and investigating that and shutting it down. So that's the kind of thing that DLP addresses, right? Could be credit card information, could be sensitive data that's getting pulled out, and we have alerts that go off when we notice that, and it'll stop it. Vulnerability and patch management. We've always in this board operated on a when is the best time for people to do an update, do an emergency patch, and that sort of thing. There may be times now moving forward we call zero-day exploits where we have to install something immediately. We can't wait, and this is just a sort of a heads up that might happen. It may not be at a convenient time. Section 7 talks about what we call cyber hygiene, physical security, and just a reminder that it's everyone's responsibility and that we should all operate in a zero trust environment all the time, whether you're working at your desk, in your classroom, in the office, or as Section 8 talks about, at home. So you have you work from home, I work from home, teachers are marking at home, and we should all be operating in a zero trust environment. And that means, ensuring that you have MFA, that you haven't disabled your lock screens and your sleep functions and all these other things that you should be doing. And also just being wary of where you're leaving information around, whether your kids can see other people's personal information at the dining room table and all that kind of thing, okay? Section 9 speaks specifically to supply chain and third-party service providers, vendors, contractors, those pieces, and that they must meet our standards if they're going to do work in our board. And we know we have some existing vulnerabilities, and we're working to remedy those. Some will just have to be accepted risks. There are some legacy systems that just can't be updated and it would cost too much money. So Section 10 is our software and technology catalog. This is just, for teachers who want to test, apps in their classrooms and suddenly they're signing up kids for different apps and there's no NDA. We don't have parent permission. We don't have any of those pieces, right? And teachers, all educators, I do too. We all love to test, new apps and it's free. And again, it's just a reminder, nothing is free, right? If the product is free, then you're the product, right? So we have to approve and we will set up test environments. We were just meeting today about how we set up test environments for teachers and for IPLs and people in spec ed who want to test a new app or a new piece of software, but do it safely in a sandboxed environment where it's not live and you're not going to a school to, hey, everybody at Abbey Park, test this out and see how it goes. Now it's in a safe environment and it can't do any harm. Section 11 is around our breach response, and you'll see the NIST standards there about governance and identify and protect and detect and respond and recover. And there's quite a bit in here. The Ministry of Ed, some folks there actually reviewed this AP before bringing it to you, and they asked me to emphasize the automation of our detection response and so on. That it's not, there's something that's called alert fatigue. So when you have somebody staring at a screen for 8 hours a day, every day of the week, and all these alerts go off all the time, every day. Most of them mean nothing. They're low level, and then you miss the high level one that you needed to pay attention to. Okay, so, and that's I think essentially it. There is an exception piece at the end because there's always some exceptions, and yeah. So there's the AP. I'll take any further questions.
Are there any questions for Jonathan? Okay, seeing none, thank you. There's a great deal of work that went into this and thinking and preventative type of work, so we all appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, our next is painting during occupied and occupied hours by Ian. And Ian will stay on with us for a number of subsequent administrative procedures that we have on our list for tonight.
Thank you and good evening. So the first AP that I've got is painting. These were updated to reflect partly as we test more of our schools doing construction, we do designated substance survey testing. And I will say we are finding more paint and block filler within our schools that does contain asbestos. And as such, we certainly are experiencing some difficulties doing simple tasks like hanging projectors. We need to engage with third parties with specialized skills. And as such, we're reiterating that we don't want staff painting and modifying rooms within their buildings. We're also recognizing last year we needed a specialized product to be applied in one of our stairwells. And as such, want to make sure that we've got proper ventilation and curing times, and then notification to principal and staff. Happy to take any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions, so let's proceed to the next AP.
Thank you. The next one is bottled water, and very minor updates there, reflecting the fact that we've achieved bottle filling stations in all of our schools, and still want to support the environment while minimizing bottle usage in our schools.
I'm not seeing any questions. Quick question. Did you just say, to clarify, all schools now have a water filling station?
That's correct.
That's wonderful. Okay, on to exterior, exterior.
Thank you. This one was updated to reflect joint responsibility with the Communications and Engagement Department. We want to reinforce our branding. Also remind schools that they should not be tendering works on their own, that they should collaborate with central staff to support them. And as well, updated the sample to reflect our current signage guidelines and branding guidelines.
Any questions on that, AP? Jean.
Thank you very much to the Vice Chair. Section A, I had a question, Section A, Part 2, tenant requests, childcares. My question was, do the tenant requests have to follow the signage guidelines? I'm not sure that I'm reading that. There's just wanted clarification on that.
Through the Vice Chair, I'll say I'm not an expert on this, but certainly we've got facilities that are joint and will have multiple signs that include our logo as well as a third party. And so certainly we'll want to collaborate there to make sure that both parties' signage guidelines are adhered to respect the branding. So I'll say in general, I don't believe that we deter these efforts. We just want to ensure that we would collaborate, especially on a joint signage. I think Dr. Frank Hayden, where we've got multiple signs, and certainly want to accommodate every brand.
Okay. May I have a second question? Yes, under 3C. Under 3C in this section, it talks about the corporate partnership, sponsorship, and donations, but later on, it seems to be, I'm looking under later on, I'm seeing it crossed out, that in fact, we've gone to a different title maybe? We've gone to the third party agreement. Is that something different? For example, under Part C, 2E, it says corporate advertising in accordance with third party agreement, and corporate partnership, sponsorship, admin procedure was crossed out. So have we changed the title of that? I just want to see that there's consistency if we've changed the title.
Thank you for the question. I'm missing a portion. I do see the corporate partnership / sponsorship admin procedure under 3C. And up above I see 2E under.
Yes,
okay, so one is a ground or pylon sign, and we're suggesting that where that occurs, we would rely on our third-party agreement. The third one is an outdoor scoreboard, which would reflect more of a sponsorship opportunity, then it would be a third party.
Indeed, it's two different procedures.
Yes.
I just needed to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions on this, Robbie?
I don't see the, sorry, I've lost it now. Corporate partnership, sponsorship in the list of our admin procedures. So I am wondering if that was replaced by the third-party agreement, but I don't have the history on that. Anyway,
Yes, it
something
was.
to take away, take a look at.
Thank you, and I can take that back to verify I've got that right.
Okay, any other questions on this AP? Seeing none, I have a quick question, and that is the log of water testing and turning on the taps, the procedure that staff have to do in designated schools. Is there a protocol or an audit process for checking the logs to make sure that those schools who are designated to have their taps opened in advance are doing that?
Yes, thank you for the question. So that's the drinking water testing admin procedure, for which we've got minor revisions and an update to reflect that we've got a compliance officer within the facilities department team that is helping to support our compliance. So every summer we do testing of our facilities, and we notify school principals at the beginning of the year of schools that have had exceedances that are required to flush. And with that, we've got a drinking water binder in each school that tracks the logging of these activities by our head custodian. I'll say similar to other areas of the board, we do struggle with attendance from time to time. And so when that occurs, we do send in relief caretakers that are trained to do the flushing as required, whether that be daily or weekly, and log it accordingly. So there is a process, there is a tracking mechanism. The audits occur through our facility services supervisors as well as our new compliance officer.
Thank you very much, and I see Shanice on the list now.
Okay, thank you. So the most question I believe is already answered. So I'm just thinking we need to clarify. We already have a compliance officer, so we need to have a definition in the AP to say once we received the water testing report, and if there's certain operation we need to do, for example, the daily flushing or weekly flushing. So the school must have someone is responsible for to understand the provincial standard and to be responsible for the operation. Also, who is responsible for the retest. For example, if the water quality we need further fix. After some of construction or the plumbing is finished, is done, and who should do the retest should be included in this AP, make it practical.
So thanks for the questions. I'll say our staff, our head custodians are trained in proper flushing of our schools. So there is a custodial training procedure, and to become a head custodian, you must be trained to do this. Each school is unique, and depending on how the plumbing systems are fed, some have end of lines and different I'll say tools or mechanisms to help with the flushing. So our head custodians are responsible and they are trained to do the flushing. To do the sampling, we do rely on our compliance officer. He organizes all the tests that are sampled for standing and flush samples submitted to a lab. Lab results are shared with the Ministry of the Environment, and I forget their name, Conservation and Parks, I think it's changed to. And so we collaborate with the authority, and they are partners and advisors in terms of our response. So generally they will guide us if we need to take corrective actions. They will help support us in what those corrective actions are and dictate when we need to resample, to resubmit testing. And I will say that, yes, as we navigate our schools and do renewal work and construction projects, I have found in my past experience that if we add a new bottle filling station, is a great example, and pull out an old plumbing fixture, sometimes we start to see exceedances because we've disturbed the piping, we've jiggled the old systems, and sometimes have let some of that solder loose or some of the lead that might be leaching into the water, make that more prevalent or show up in our results. And as such, again, we'll work with the Ministry of the Environment to ensure our corrective actions are appropriate and safe for the school and the occupants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to accessibility planning.
Thanks. This one's just very minor updates to reflect legislative changes and titles.
Okay, next up is community use of schools and rentals.
Again, no substantial changes there, just updating dates and reflecting current practice.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll move on to Shani.
Thank you. I have the question because when I first read, I believe we need to add several content, but when read again, I believe this AP is for HDSB staff to use to follow the procedure to handle all the rental business. And for the public, actually, we already have a separate page to list the price, the rental price. So I believe if we, for the board operation, for school operation, or for the public to understand we are on the same page, is it possible to add a reference page or attachment or appendix to this AP to list, give the link where the public can find the rental price? So this is also give the staff to clarify where we need to update. Every year we have an update of the price. So this is the place we need to update. Or if the public have any questions to ask, so who to contact? Because I got a lot of questions for rental, different type of use. So I'm not the right person to answer those questions. So usually I forward the question to you. And if the user, if we have an office or some generic for board use, those emails, so public can ask the question directly. So it will be easier for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, certainly we can add links to this administrative procedure to link it to our rental page, which does show our rental rates on an annual basis and does provide contact information, how to become a rental user within our system. And I recognize that we also do rentals through our partners, through our municipal partners. But certainly we have staff to support groups that are looking to use our facilities, and would be happy to support that. So we can add that.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, let's move on to active transportation.
Thank you. This one's probably the one with the most substantive changes, but not huge in terms of how we'll deliver support for active transportation. We did look to remove the charter as it did not necessarily have any teeth to it, and while it was a good vision statement, was not vetted through with our partners either. Rather, we look to what we're calling a matrix, is intended to be a tool that schools can actually use to help solve problems on the ground with minor issues, and then escalate as required to get central staff support as well as partner support, and then in cases where we may want political support to help with our some of our more challenging sites. So there's some links to some other resources that had been referenced in the old document have been added, and I will say we did look, have not had any success finding the volunteer handbook, and would suggest that we remove that and add our webpage under volunteers.
Okay, and we have a question from Margot.
Thank you. Through you, Joanna, to Ian. So this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. So I'm just wondering, we have all these great opportunities underneath in the procedures as to opportunities for children and students and families to look at how they can promote that active transportation, those walking or taking the bus. How are we promoting this outside? So again, I know schools have their weekly newsletter, but are we as a board doing anything to try to promote some of these options for families, to really encourage and try and get the families to take hold of some of these options and run with it? Because it's a big problem, particularly in our older schools where there's nowhere for them to park.
Thanks for the question. It's a difficult one to answer because it's multifaceted. I will say, I've toured a couple of schools now with parking problems where we've invited members from our municipal partnership to witness what's going on. We've been connecting, and I'll say, I should say I've started to connect in the absence of Suzanne Burwell, who retired. She had great connections to the community. I'm starting to build those connections and trying to, I'll say, identify how we can proceduralize it and help garner better support and have central repositories of information, because where we've had significant problems and then also put our mind to it and had significant success, it was, I'll say, targeted in terms of timing of education plans, targeted in terms of times of policing or by law enforcement. We've pulled in third-party service providers to help us with traffic analysis to support a case, to substantiate our case with our municipal partners. I think of, our municipal partners are starting to activate more, I'll say, committees around active transportation, and they have staff that are engaged and employed in active transportation. So we're trying to find those synergies where we can connect and strengthen our voice, because it is ultimately all about educating the parents that drive their kids to school every day. That's what's causing most of the chaos on our school sites.
Yeah, thank you. And I do think, just quick follow-up, is that punitive piece, like you talked about the traffic wardens and stuff, I think that actually makes the situation worse sometimes. And so again, as you said, I think it's trying to get out with those positive messages, trying to engage our parent councils, trying to engage our senior staff, to be promoting like walking Wednesdays. Like that to me was something I just think there's so many pieces in here that could just be little hints and reminders for parents to try to think about how they can support that safe walking environment going to school. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. And question from Amy.
Thank you. I recognize the taking out the active transportation charter because it wasn't procedural in nature, but I'm confused a little bit by the flow of the document after that section was removed, because we go from planning and promoting active transportation, which has a bunch of subcategories, then the removed active transportation charter, and then we go into learning, community cohesion and appreciation, environmental sustainability. Was that part of the active transportation charter? And if so, should that still be there? Or is that now supposed to be under the heading of planning and promoting active transportation? I'm a little bit confused about the flow there. And I just want to make sure that all of the pieces from the charter were removed.
Thank you for that, Amy. I do think that got missed. I think this is an earlier version. I definitely know I missed it and then caught it after, but I think we've got the wrong version here. So I think you're correct that that's a remnant from the active transportation charter that needs to come out.
Thank you. Yeah, I was getting confused. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, seeing no other speakers, I do have a question or a comment. And first of all, I want to thank you, Ian and Fred, for joining me one morning late fall to observe the parking lot and the flow of traffic and pedestrians in front of West Oak Public School. It's a school that has received and has been receiving complaints from the school community and neighbors who are affected by the traffic issues there. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. And one suggestion I would have, and this builds on Margot's question and commentary, is one of my schools, Emily Carr, had in the past done a really good job of mapping out safe walking routes for the students who live within walking distance, indicating both trail systems or the streets and where the cross guards are located. And I think that would be a really good thing for all schools to map out and share with their school community at the start of the school year, right after all the important school forms go out. Perhaps that would be a communication, a pictorial depiction of where it's safe to cross and walk, so that parents have the comfort in knowing that their students will be safe in arriving to school, and where there are points where students maybe can meet up and do, what we used to call a walking school bus, right? So I would suggest that maybe that be part of the education, and also encourage my fellow trustees to share that kind of information with their parent councils, through their super councils, et cetera, and help to promote active transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to that point, I will say we did try to link in the Walk and Wheel website link, which I think provides some of those resources. And again, we want to work with our partners to see where we can enhance signage to encourage active transportation. And I'll say politically, my hope is that we start to see some streets actually close down during arrival and departure to help support safety around our school sites.
Yeah, and so a big thank you to our municipal partners who are working with our staff in facilitating these kind of infrastructure changes. Okay, and now on to the last AP from Ian, and that's asbestos management in board facilities.
Thank you. Again, this one is very minor in terms of the revisions. It's reflecting that we do have a compliance officer on our team now that is responsible for asbestos management throughout our schools. And I'll say we're recognizing perhaps where we've misstepped in the past, where we've had information for designated substance surveys that we haven't shared as timely as we could have. So certainly entrenching that in our admin procedure, working with our compliance officer and our service providers to get that information out to all of our schools where we've done surveys and we have new information. We need to get those into the binders and update those at school sites and educate our staff about the changes that we've learned.
Okay, if you have a question, please go on the speakers list. Amy.
Thanks. So at the bottom of this procedure, there's a little sentence. Should a disturbance of asbestos occur, please contact your family, a school superintendent, the superintendent, blah, blah, blah. I'm wondering if that would be better placed higher in the document and perhaps be more of a command than a please contact. Because we don't want people breathing in this stuff. So I just thinking firming it up a bit and making it higher in the document would probably be a good idea.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, and I think you're absolutely correct. We should put that up and not make it a plea at the end because we have been responding to these, and we need to be proactive and get the messaging out as soon as we learn about these. Thank you.
Okay, Tanya.
Yep. So question, not to Ian, but as we go through all these APs, a lot of these APs impact information that parents should receive. Let's say there's asbestos in a school, or I don't know, somehow parents are being impacted by signage. I'm making stuff up now. Obviously, in each of these situations, parents should receive some sort of communication if their student, the school is being impacted. So is there a procedure that speaks to what our communication protocol is in each of these scenarios? And I don't think we should include it in every AP, but is there an overarching AP that speaks to what the HDSB does if something happens? And what's that protocol?
Thank you for that, Tanya. I'm going to ask Heather to comment first.
Thanks for the question. We don't have an overarching formal procedure per se. So in this one in particular, we encourage schools to contact their superintendent and communications and engagement, just because every situation is unique. But that's definitely something that we could take back and look into. But yeah, the direction right now is to contact superintendent communications, and we do have templated letters that we use in the event of asbestos or if there's exceedances of lead and water, similar in each of those cases.
Okay, any other questions for Ian? Seeing none, thank you very much for all of this work. It's great. And now we'll move into 3.1.12. And Superintendent Fowler is bringing to us 5 administrative procedures.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and good evening, everyone. So the 5 policies that you have before you have been reviewed and revised in collaboration with public health, senior team, various personnel from departments within the board. All of the revisions truly are minor for these 5. I do have other ones coming a little bit later, but I do look forward to any questions or comments.
Okay, so maybe we'll go one by one. Are there any questions on the administration of prescribed and emergency medication? Okay, we have Margot.
So I think it kind of blankets a lot of them. In particular, so it's still emergency medication, and it also comes into the idea of the epilepsy piece, because I know in December there was the Ministry of Education put forward something about imperative training for staff in terms of life-saving medication, particularly for students with epilepsy. So in the policy, or the policy, yeah, the AP, it says that there will be annual training for staff. Is that all staff at all schools? How are we rolling that out?
Great question, Margot. So through you, Joanna, to Margot, we do have an online training system that has a series of modules every year or biannually, depending on the type of module. But in this case, anything to do with, say, the asthma or the epilepsy, there are specific modules that staff do have to observe at the beginning of every year, and that would be all school staff that work in schools with students.
And is there, like, I don't know if it's for this or one of my other things, is there a checklist to make sure that staff do it, so that you say, you have not done your training?
Absolutely. People love those emails that come and say, you have this many days. So yes, we are given a certain amount of time at the beginning of the year, and it is tracked and monitored electronically.
And
Wonderful. Thank you.
In fact, I get those emails, and they're quite strong. So.
Okay, great. Next is Jean.
Yes, thank you very much. Through my reading of the emergency medication 8.1, I was seeing terms being used as regulated healthcare professional, and then some terms were healthcare provider. I'm wondering if there could just be a review to make sure that we have consistent terminology of whether we're talking about a professional or a provider. I think it would read better if it was consistent. The second question I would point I would have, would be, and maybe this goes to the director or perhaps Sari. I know he's aboard here tonight. I keep reading about this mandatory training and all of this, and it's so very important. And we just talked about the reminders that come out if you haven't done it and so on and so forth. I just have to ask, occasional teachers, are they given like 2 or 3 days ahead of the school year to do this training, and are they paid for it? Because I'm not sure where the occasional teacher gets this training when they aren't in a school, when all of this may be happening either through a PD day or in whatever form it may otherwise occur.
I can answer this question, Director Ennis. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jean, for the question. The answer to your questions is yes to both. occasional teachers, occasional education workers are required to do this training, and the training is targeted based on the job classification that you're in. So some training may be of relevance to your job and some training may not be. So we bundle the training modules in a way that makes sense and is aligned with your duties and responsibilities. If you happen to be in a long-term occasional contract as a teacher or an education worker, you're obviously paid as a long-term occasional education worker or teacher, and also the expectation is that you complete the training during the life of your contract. So the expectation is that principals and vice principals allow time for long-term occasional teachers and education workers to complete the training, be it on the PD day, or perhaps outside of the school day. But nonetheless, they are paid for it. Daily supply teachers or daily occasional education workers, they are given the entire school year to complete this training. And they are compensated for it accordingly. And that language, the compensation piece, is enshrined in the collective agreement. So we speak to, the payment of the occasional teacher or education worker, because this is paid work. We are requiring you to do training. And we make sure that the payment is appropriate, given the length of time that it may take you to complete the training.
So if I may just add, Jean, just an appreciation for the question, because the monthly meetings that Amy and I attend with the union leads, we're often reminded about our occasional teachers and making sure that we're providing the same opportunities for them. So it's something that is top of mind, and we're reminded, and because sometimes we do tend to slip in areas.
Thank you.
And just to jump on your first question, actually, I did try most of them to do regulated healthcare provider. So I will go back through all of them and just make sure it's consistent. Sorry that we missed a few. So 100% we agree.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more speaker on the list, and that's Shini.
Okay, thank you. My question is about the who will be some emergency happened in the school. So when the trained personnel came, so who can be handle the emergency? For example, in the lunchroom, choke, and some students used the overdose to injection the insulin. This is already in our situation mentioned in the AP. So for those situations, do we prepare? For example, for insulin, if we provide some chocolate, sometimes can resolve this issue. So does our teacher get enough training for that to handle that? So if we wait for the first respondent, could be a few minutes, and then in the situation, for example, the choke, we cannot wait that long. And but for those trainings like the CPR, this is a need to we require in-person training. So in the school, how many administrators or teachers get proper training for that? Thank you.
So I think I'll try it. Thank you, Trustee Zhang, for the first question. So we've mentioned already that we do general awareness training at the beginning of the school year for all staff, and that is something that we have. But then in addition, as part of the plan of care that's created for any student that has a medical need, as captured by many of these, you'll see that throughout the plan of care language. That plan of care document is updated annually, and it outlines the specific roles and responsibilities for staff during an emergency prior to any first responders arriving on scene. And that is shared. It needs to be shared with all people who support that student. And I think in the AP that it even speaks to teachers who are on a leave for the day are leaving that information specific along with the plan of care in their files. And so really any student that has a plan of care, it's reviewed by all parties that support that student.
Okay, any other questions specific to this AP? Seeing none, any questions specific to students with anaphylaxis, supporting students with anaphylaxis? Tanya?
Thank you. I did have a question with the anaphylaxis AP, and that was in section 1A, item 4. It lists, provide the school with 2 epinephrine autoinjection kits. Now, from the comments, I know you replied back to me saying the 2 kits means one's with the child and one's with the office. And I'm looking at this paragraph. Could we perhaps add some clarification around why the 2 or what the 2 kits were for? And the reason I say that is when I first read this, that one sentence, I thought it meant that the school was to provide, so the parent was to provide the school with 2 EpiPens in addition to the one the child had to carry, which would make it a total of 3 EpiPens. So if we could just add some clarification on 1A4, that where the 2 EpiPens are going.
Sure, I can take that back. Thank you very much, Trustee Rosa. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions on this. Any questions specific to supporting students with epilepsy and seizures? Moving on to supporting students with asthma. Tanya?
Sorry, not specific to any AP, but I am thinking in a case with anaphylactic or seizures. Shinyi had brought up a point, you know, if a kid's eating and chokes and needs something. I'm thinking in the context where students are on their lunch, there's no teacher in the room, but there's a parent volunteer or a paid volunteer to be supervising that classroom. Do we provide any training to those paid volunteers in case there is an anaphylactic reaction during that lunchtime, or if there's a seizure during that lunchtime? So do we provide training for paid volunteers?
Thank you, Tanya. So any person, and I was referring to this before, any person who has responsibilities supervising that class of students would receive information related to the plan of care. So a lunchroom supervisor or a student supervisor in this case would receive information about that plan of care if they're in the classroom with the students at the time during their lunch hour. So there are steps in place so that anyone that is supervising the classroom would have access to the emergency response procedures.
Right. They would have access to information. So if a child is anaphylactic, they would know there's an anaphylactic child in the classroom. But does that person know how to administer the EpiPen?
So training must be provided to people that are in supervision of the children with plans of care. So any training, so the plan of care would actually lay out that training requirement, and anyone that's supervising those would be trained by the school.
So if I can just chime in with a comment based on personal experience, we need to be also mindful of these kind of ad hoc situations where parents are invited to step in so that, for instance, there is a teacher appreciation lunch. And so we want to make the time for teachers to meet together for a lunch provided by the parent council. In that case, often parents or members of the parent council step in to fill in those gaps, right, in supervision. There needs to be a system for connecting those parents with somebody who is able to quickly step in, right? Because you won't be able to do that kind of training on the spot quickly, right? So just to be mindful of that.
Thank you. And they're really good points, both what you've shared, Joanna, and what Tanya has shared. And it is a really important reminder for our principals to be ensuring that they have, safety procedures, training down to ensure that the classrooms are safe, even when the teacher themselves is not present. So those are excellent reminders, and I'll definitely share that back with the principals again. Thank you.
Let's move on. Any questions for supporting students with asthma? Seeing none. Supporting students with diabetes? Not seeing any questions. I believe that's it then for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to item 3.1.17, infection prevention, body fluid spills cleanup with Superintendent Taha, who is joining us virtually. Over to you, Sari.
Thanks, Madam Vice Chair. Good evening, everyone. I am pleased to be joined by Judy Goldsworthy, Manager of Health and Safety. And before I turn it over to Judy, the infection prevention AP, body fluid cleanup AP, as you can see from the date, existed since 2008. So needless to say, it required quite a significant overhaul in terms of its revisions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Judy.
Thanks very much, Sari, and good evening, everyone. Yes, we did decide to undertake a modernization of the AP as it is quite dated, and the methodology that we currently employ in teaching and training staff about various hazards in the workplace has changed. So what we've opted to do is take out the bodily fluid exposure components from the older AP and put them into a separate support document, which is referenced in the new AP. And then we've decided to keep the bodily fluid cleanup portion there, and it's the more reactive portion of the process, and have that captured in the AP for cleanup purposes, especially for those cases where we might have an absence of caretaking in a school on any given day, and other staff may need to respond to the bodily fluid cleanup. But the preventative piece about initial exposure to bodily fluids really has changed, especially with COVID and our understanding of exposure to biological hazards. So we have parked that in a more user-friendly document that staff can reference at any point in time.
Okay, and we have a speaker list. We have Amy.
Just a minor point. I'm wondering, the review date for this is 3 years hence instead of 4. Is there is that because the ministry prescribes it to be 3 years, or should it have been 4?
It should be 4.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Thanks. Otherwise, I think it's a tremendous amount of work you've done here.
It was a bit painstaking, but thank you for that.
Are there any questions, any other questions for Sari or Judy? Seeing none, thank you very much, Judy, for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we proceed to item 3.2 with budget presentation, we will take a brief bio break. Let's reconvene at 25 after. again. We are now up to agenda item 3.2 with a budget presentation by Superintendent Nagoy, and Roxana will introduce her colleague to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're just setting the presentation up on the screen. And with me today, I have Jay Chantavang, and he's our Controller of Financial Services, or the General Manager of Financial Services. And over the past few months, we've done a lot of work, and Jay has done a lot of work in data analysis to just see how we fare, what does the provincial perspective look like. So we figured out which one moves the slides. All right. So we wanted to do something a little bit different this time. As trustees would remember from our December 6th board meeting, when we provided a timeline and a bit of an update on what the budget process will look like this year. We are heading into a year with declining enrollment, as well as a deficit year that we have to eliminate. And it is quite substantial. So we're looking at efficiency savings, doing things differently, doing more with less, essentially. So today we don't have a lot of numbers for you, but we have some information to just show you the current picture, both from a provincial and board perspective. And then we would like to talk a little bit about planning and where we go from here over the next few months. We have a couple of options set out for trustees where we need some input in terms of the direction we should be taking. And then if we still have time, we'll do some breakout room discussions if we want to do a couple of groups, or we can have a discussion as a group in terms of some input from trustees. We'll continue the discussion in February and in March. We'll see just as needed. We'll have more sessions at the Committee of the Whole as we move through the process. So a quick overview of the budget development process, and you're already familiar with this. The budget aligns to the multi-year strategic plan. We're currently in developing a new multi-year strategic plan, so that's going to be something that we'll be paying close attention as that unfolds. And we align the resources to the annual operating plan that supports the strategic priorities, the capital plan, the special education plan, as well as keep in mind our corporate risk profile. What are those top risks, which can be threats or opportunities, and how that impacts our ability to meet our strategic objectives. There's also a number of regulatory compliance enveloping, so restrictions of how the funds are used, and as well as other regulations and employment terms and conditions that restrict some of the things that we can or cannot do as we move along. So from a timeline perspective, these are the key dates from now until June 24th, for when we hope to have a final budget approval. As you'll recall, the ministry and the regulation requires us to have an approved budget by the end of June every year for the fiscal year or the school year following, or starting in September of that year. So we are right now, January 17th. We had a SEAC committee last week. We're going to be looking at the budget survey deployment by the end of the month with a number of other budget sessions for consultation. We're going to be presenting at PIC. I believe that's February 8th. I think I'm still confirming that date. So through February, we're going to do a few more sessions for consultation, as well as with staff. And we'll bring a report back on the survey results, and hopefully by then, the release of the grants for student needs on April 3rd. The grants for student needs were released last year, mid-April, so it might be pushed to the May meeting, but for now, that's a tentative date. And then we're looking at coming back to SEAC with a draft budget and proposals in May. A draft presentation for trustees in May as well before we provide the report. And in between February to April, we'll schedule meetings as required so that we can work through the plan. next section. Yes, please. So I think we've already covered this actually. So that's the different stakeholder consultation that we are going to be doing this year.
Sorry, Chair Collard has a question. Amy?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking at the timeline and I got confused at the very end where we're saying June 24th final budget report. June 24th is a Monday?
Yes, I believe that was a rescheduled meeting for the last meeting of the school year.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Okay, so we can actually move past this slide. And from a provincial perspective, so I just wanted to highlight a few things. As trustees know, education is the second largest component of the provincial budget. And for the current year, it amounted to just over $27 billion, with additional supports that were one-time in nature or tied to collective agreements. And that was an additional 700, almost 800 million. Some of those items are still in negotiations, central negotiations, so not everything is confirmed in terms of support for student funds continuation for all of our employee groups. We know most of them, but we're still waiting on a couple to be finalized. So there's still information that is emerging. The education funding consultation took place in November, early December this year, and trustees did provide input and letters. We provided information through OPSPA, as well as COSBO, the group for the superintendents of business, in order to provide information or an informed decision to the ministry and the Treasury Board into the grants for student needs for next year. From a provincial perspective, the fall economic outlook is stressing the goal of the government to continue their trajectory to balance the provincial books by 25-26. That means eliminating a $5.6 billion current deficit. So that looking from that perspective, a second component of the provincial budget, there will be some austerity measures that we will see in the next year. And just priorities from the ministry, they are focused on improving student achievement, focusing on skilled trades, and student well-being. So those are the main priorities that remain as we're building our own multi-year plan. Some of the things that are impacting that we see and are not reflected in the grants for student needs include the inflation and the market pressures that have come to light in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, since the pandemic. And the grants for student needs has not kept up with these costs. Federally, we have, as an employer, we are mandated to cover the increased contributions for CPP and EI, as well. Those were not reflected in the grants for the education sector. The special education funding is one of the large components in our funding. It's over $100 million. It is based on older data and has not kept up with the increase in students with exceptionalities. The new transportation funding model has actually resulted in a reduction overall to most school boards in terms of how it's been allocated and distributed. And finally, we've mentioned that the supports for student funds that are tied to collective agreements are still being confirmed for a couple of the union groups. So from a board perspective, we are looking at a decline in enrollment. We are, while we're still building new schools, a secondary school is planned for North Oakville, as well as a number of elementary schools, opening of Milton number 12, the Oakville number 3 is under construction, and we are planning and designing Milton 13 and Oakville number 5. So lots going on the elementary side, and on the secondary side, we do have some enrollment pressures in North Oakville and continue to have some enrollment pressures in South Milton. And from a regulatory perspective, we have a $7.7 billion deficit budget for revised estimates, which we are required by regulation to balance next year. So I think we've mentioned some of these already, but this is the impact on the board of some of the shortcomings in the funding. So for example, the special education grant was reallocated provincially in 2014-2015 over a 4-year period. Our board lost at the time $20 million over those four years. So that's money that we continue to lose every year. The increase in statutory benefits, the CPP and EI enhancements, costs the board well over $7 million a year that is not funded. Transportation funding is currently at $2.2 million below. The transportation costs are $2.2 million below the funding, even though our consortium is. Sorry, what did I say? The costs of transportation are $2.2 million higher than the funding. So we have a shortfall of $2.2 million, even though we are very efficient. We have triple runs on most of our routes. So we employ all the tools in the toolkit in trying to make it as efficient as possible. CPI has increased well over 16%, and in some cases, market conditions and shortage in demand has seen increases of upwards of 20 or 30% for some contracted services and goods. Whereas the GSN had 2% for transportation over 4 years and 11% for school operations. We also are not receiving the entire grant payment that is calculated for our board. This is a cash management strategy for the province, where a school board that has proceeds of disposition balances or surplus balances does not receive all the grant up front until those balances are drawn down. That also means that $28 million for us are not received annually, which we could have gained interest revenue of about $1.5 million that we could have used towards balancing the budget. Next slide, please. And these are just the main areas of shortfall within our own budget compared to the funding allocation. As I've mentioned, special education and student well-being are about $17 million overspent. The supply staff the trending is increases with just over 10 million. So this is the highest we've seen so far, 10 million shortfall in a year. We've talked about the transportation and the statutory benefits. The international students are still not anywhere close to the pre-pandemic level. So we're still about 2 million below in international student fees than where we were before 2020. Next slide. So how do we, make this work? There's areas within our board and within the funding allocation that we don't spend all of it. So usually the programs that are underspent by far is the school operation, so the maintenance of schools and groundskeeping, board administration, so all of the corporate staffing, the building, licensing for the main software, etc., is in there, and library and guidance, language allocation, as well as some of the other revenue that we receive. Everything is allocated towards overcoming some of the shortfalls in the GSN, and of course the board accumulated surplus. And I believe here I will pass it on to Jay to walk you through some of the analysis that we've done. We've looked at data from 2017-18 to 2023-2024 to be able to compare pre-COVID and post-COVID years.
All right, so good evening, everybody. So as Roxana mentioned, we took a deep dive at our data, our financial data from the last 7 years. with including the current year's budget. So the approach was to gather 7 years of data and examine how much we've been getting funded for versus how much we've spent. So the next handful of slides will highlight kind of some of the key data points that'll hopefully help our the direction in terms of the decisions we have to make for this budget process for next school year. So some of the key points on this slide, our total revenue over this 7-year period has increased by almost 15.5%, while in line with the expenditures increasing by the same amount, just a touch more. And our deficit for compliance from the oldest year examined to the current budget year has actually grown from $5.6 million deficit to 7.2, and it's actually 7.7 with revised estimates that we just brought to you last week at board. So there's a number of factors that contribute to this deficit, and they've been in place even well before the oldest year examined, just given the structure of the programs we offer and the staffing levels we have and so forth. But we went back 7 years as, we had to kind of pick a cutoff point and go with that. From an enrollment perspective, over this time frame, it's increased by almost 5.7%, with most of it being in the secondary panel, just a little over 15%. And elementary being just under 2%. However, you'll see on a future slide coming up that at both panels, the enrollment trends are projected to decrease or flatten. So that's where some of the challenges are in terms of funding sources, because we're mostly funded based on enrollment, of course. So we'll circle back to that when we get to those slides. Wrong computer. All right, so this next slide just highlights kind of the areas where we overspend or underspend since the 2017 budget year. So again, this is cumulative since over the 7 years, and as you can see here, the largest overspent area is in instruction, so directly in the classrooms or supporting the classrooms, and the second being transportation, almost $7 million. And then other areas, mainly board contingency, contributing to almost $2 million. And then on the flip side, the underspend to help fund the overspend is in board administration of $19 million and $54 million for pupil accommodation, so maintaining our school grounds and cleaning and repairs and whatnot. So the second part of our analysis was comparing against boards that are either close to us in terms of location or enrollment levels. So it's a good way to compare so that we are comparing with boards that are similar to us, whether it's geographically, demographically, or by size. So this table summarizes the comparative boards we selected. I won't go through every board name here, but you can see them here on the slide, and shows their enrollment for the current year, their projected enrollment, their per pupil funding, and where they rank provincially on the far right. So as you can see, we are the second lowest as usual at $11,853 per pupil against the average, or comparing that to the average of our comparator boards of $12,152. So we are actually underfunded by almost $300 per pupil compared to our average comparison board. So that equates to, here at the bottom, just a little over $20 million if we were to receive the same level of funding, the $12,000 per pupil. And if we want to compare against the provincial average of $13,125, and we've shown that before at the estimates cycle, it'd be a larger gap in terms of funding. And it would obviously extrapolate to a larger amount that if we were to be funded the same per pupil level, we have a lot more funding. Any questions up to this point? I kind of see a hand. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't put my name on the speakers list, but a couple of questions. I don't even know if this is the right time to ask this question, but when I look at that deficit piece, and it comes back to the conversation we had when we approved the extra $500,000 in deficit spending. So my concern is that we keep spending more to fulfill the needs that are being forgotten, dismissed, whatever you want to say, by the government. And by doing that, as you said, for next year, we are running the risk of not having a compliant budget and therefore putting us as a board at risk in terms of accountability. So as we continue to spend more and go more and more in debt and less compliant towards our budget, are we not just, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog, right? Because they're giving us less money because every year we prove we are creative and we can spend less and we take money out of the spending on our schools. Like, I think that's quite sad that we are underfunded in our schools, building our schools. When I hear all the complaints about things that are wrong with schools, but we're doing that to try to compensate for the overspending somewhere else. I just, as always, and we've had this conversation before, Roxana, I just worry that by kind of saying, okay, we're getting less money again this year, let's figure what we can do to fix that and make things better, if we're not just making the problem worse. And then I'll go do that, and then I'll come back because I'm going to have a question for Kelly and Robbie.
Okay, Jean.
Yes, thank you. It would seem to me that tonight around this room, as we sit here and listen to this report, and thank you for all of the details that are in this report to this point, this conversation is happening right around the province. We're not, even though we're 71 or 72 every year, right around the province, and we see it through the letters that our chair receives with regards to letters that are being written by our different boards around the province to the ministry to say, we can't do it, we can't make a budget work, and so on and so forth. I guess, to Margot's point, robbing Peter to pay Paul is going to catch up with us. Mm-hmm. Our schools are going to have deficiencies that will make them untenable and more expensive in the end. It's kind of like that leaky roof where you have a little bit of a leak, and if you let it go for a while, then it becomes a much larger problem. And I think that that's what's happening here. I guess my question is as much as we go forward in trying to bring awareness to this, and we certainly have some plans through our committee with regards to this. What are other boards doing, or are we learning from them, or when's it going to stop? Like, what can we do more than what we're doing now to build this awareness and have a change? I guess I'm looking maybe to the director. You've been in conversations at Code, perhaps. Wondering if you have any insights around the province.
Thanks for that, and then certainly Roxana can jump in, but we do recognize that there is a funding deficit and shortfall that we have to make up. Thankfully, we're in a position where we have reserves, and that has been able to help us, stay afloat. I mean, some boards are not in that position that we're in, and they are looking at certainly, cutting, staff and some of the costs that are they're overspending on in order to be in compliance. Because one of the things that Roxana has told us and will continue to tell us is that the government has also changed the rules around compliance. We don't have the kind of latitude like, we used to have. There is a demand for compliance moving forward. And so, we're really being forced to make tough decisions and balance the budget. So I'll turn it over to you, Roxana.
And I think you covered it, Director Ennis. It really is. There's a lot of advocacy provincially, and the trustees and the letters. The one portion where we haven't seen as much advocacy is from the parents. So I think that's a big voice for the government. They do listen to our parents. So we're hoping that through information, through our consultation budget, just that may raise more awareness for our community, and they too will join us in really raising our voice in terms of some funding gaps that are accumulating to the point where we have to look at significant reductions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean and Margot, for those comments. And next, there's a question from Shani.
Okay, you go first. Go ahead. I don't care.
My question is quick. So can we have this document?
Yeah, we have it.
Oh, already?
Yeah, we have it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Margot, you had a question.
Okay, so mine is a bit of a two-part question. So one of them was kind of for Robbie and Kelly, because I know Kelly 100% has been leading the charge on the fair funding for a long time. And I remember, and I'm just wondering if we've gotten any close to finding answers to this question. I remember the last time we had a real push for this and we were having all those community engagement sessions, one of the things that we as trustees were doing was going to our MPP's office and asking for the funding formula. Can you tell us what the funding formula is? And I remember being, at the time, it was Jane McKenna, who was my MPP, and her assistant saying, oh yes, we have that, we'll send it to you. And of course they never did. But have we gotten any closer? Because I look at the difference here, and again, why is it different, apart from maybe cost of living in the different areas, but how do they come to that funding model? And that was my question for you. Are we any closer, or do we have any more clarity from the government as to what their funding model is?
Not really. They release a certain amount of information about how the actual funding is done, but every board is different, and there are a lot of things in there that we don't really have a grip on. And I just wanted to say something, that the fact that we're the second lowest funded board in the province is not the problem. The problem is that we're not getting the funds that we need to support all the students that we need. So, I mean, we're okay if we were getting funded properly. We don't care if we're the last funded if we had the appropriate funds. It's about getting the amount of funds. And it just goes to show you that these boards are all very similar to us, and some of them are getting more funds than us. So that's the problem. And so we do have some fair funding, and we've changed the name of it to fair funding, not fix the finances, and we're going to talk about that later.
And my second kind of follow-up question, which was for Roxana. So again, you alluded to the fact that we have all these letters, and we know how effective those letters going to the government are. These letters being sent off to the Ministry of Education, and right now we're struggling because we don't have that parent advocacy. And I know it's awful, but really parents, we need to, by us always fixing it or helping, and we are shielding the parents from the dire consequences that are coming from this lack of funding. So I'm not saying, let's stop doing that, but I'm just, to get the parents to help us, we need to allow them to recognize what it is they're going to lose. Particularly, as you said, if next year we are non-compliant and then we go into this whole new scenario with the government overseeing and whatever happens as far as that's concerned, it's a real dire picture that I don't know, because we've been so good at being creative and so good at being able to put Band-Aids on things and find ways of spreading stuff enough so that it's thin, but it's not too thin. Parents are happy with what we're doing, so they don't see that. So that's why, for me, I think, how can we need to really get those parents engaged to recognize how much we are struggling, because I don't know that they can see it. They see little struggles, but they don't see the big picture. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And Roxana, is there more from you? Okay.
Yeah, just a couple more of slides for comparator information. So just some of the highlights. We put on the next couple slides here on where we rank in the furthest year that we look back and the current year we budgeted for. And so, for example, the first bullet points here for both years, ourselves and Durham were the only boards in a deficit. And then you fast forward to today, and all boards except two are in a deficit or budgeted for a deficit. And then the second bullet points here, we're the second highest overspend in instruction, and then these days we are the highest. And then we've always been the highest overspend in spec ed, the third bullet points there. And the next slide, just a few other areas, budget areas. In admin, we were the highest underspent back in 2017, and we're still up there in terms of being the second highest underspent. And then transportation is where it's kind of flipped. We were break even in 2017, but these days we're the third highest overspent due to losing some of the funding there, as Roxanne mentioned earlier. And then people accommodation, lastly, we've always been the third highest underspent compared to our boards. So then the next handful of slides are to just give a refresher as well as an update on some of our key budget components for the current year, as well as looking ahead with our best information at this point for next year. So starting off with enrollment history, our projected numbers as of the fall submission to the ministry are here, 66,625 ADE compared to our current revised budget of 67,137. So as you can see, it's a 512 ADE drop, or about 0.76%. So that, of course, translates to, from a revenue perspective, we'll lose grant. So this is just the next two slides are just a chart. This is enrollment chart for elementary, so showing 7 years of history, and then the next 4 years projected. So as you can see, you kind of start in the middle here. We have our actuals from the prior year, the dip for the current year, and then it'll dip for another year for next year, and then it'll trend back upwards is the 4-year outlook for elementary enrollment. For secondary, slightly different picture. It's been on the up and up for the 7 years, but then it's going to taper off over the next 4 or 5 years, as you can see. So it's just a pie chart here of our total revenue for the current year of $879 million. So it's just showing in pie form where the big slices and the small slices are in terms of funding sources. So of course the biggest one being the GSN, almost 90% there in the blue slice. Provincial grants other, 1.1. I can't even tell what color that is from here. SGF, investment income, and so forth make up the other slices. The next couple slides just kind of put it in word form, essentially, the pie chart, just a little more detail for your reference. And then on the flip side, the expenses of $885 million in pie form. As you see there, the instruction is the largest slice at 77%. People in combination, 14%. Transportation, 2%. Administration, 2%. And others, 4%. And again, and just a little more detail on what makes up the slices. And this is just a quick breakdown of salary versus non-salary. So salary and benefits make up about 80% of our budget, and the 21% being non-salary. So I'll hand it off to Roxana for the rest.
All right. And now for, I guess, just the last few slides is more the reality of next year. The new regulation requires us to balance the budget next year. So even though we do have an accumulated surplus, we are not allowed to have the up to 1% of the provincial allocation, which has been the case until now. So the regulation is requiring us and the Board of Trustees to approve a balanced budget, which means we have to eliminate $7.7 million In addition to that, we have additional challenges. So declining enrollment means we'll have less funding to work with. The interest rates for, if the Bank of Canada reduces the interest rates, then our interest revenue will be lower than it was this year, and so forth. If there's any other changes in the grants for student needs, that will impact the amount. But for now, what we know is about 7.7 million in identified savings and efficiencies is the task of all of us in order to find efficiencies and savings. So having said that, everything is on the table, and that's one of the discussions with trustees today. So we're looking at mandated staff and staffing ratios, class sizes, making sure that we're as efficient as possible in staffing our schools based on everything that is regulated. Looking at all of the rest of the staff that are not mandated or tied to a class size. We are looking at any duplication of services where we may have resources dedicated within different departments of the HDSB or with other agencies. We are reviewing all programs, all transportation, and of course, all the operating budgets to see what we have, what we need, what needs to be reallocated, what we could do without. Of course, on the flip side, there's always going to be areas that will need additional investment, not less investment. That will make that 7.7 million higher. So if we have to put in $1 million, then we have to find $8.7 million. So that is an area where we're keeping in mind our key risks and how they will unfold into the budget next year. Next slide, please. So some of the constraints I've already talked about. We have, collective agreements that are still being finalized. Some staff is tied to support for student funds, which have not yet been confirmed. There is a group that is not confirmed, so we have to, of course, take that into account. Staffing timelines are also a constraint in some of the decisions we have to make. So some decisions have to be made more cautiously earlier before we see all the information. So we would make those decisions before the end of March or sooner for some staffing timelines. And then once we get to June, if there is additional funding and we can afford to do something different, then we would be posting additional positions. So that's just something that is not efficient for a staffing perspective, but is something that we need to do from regulatory standpoint. Of course, there's enveloping provisions, so some funding has to be used for certain eligible areas only. And enrollment is not on our side next year. Both panels are declining. Next slide, please. This is what our deficit elimination plan looks like, both what was approved in June and what was just approved at the last board meeting for the revised budget. So that's the 7.7 million there in the last column. $500,000 is a provincial for contingencies, but the rest are all different initiatives that support the multi-year plan, some temporary staffing, as well as we have 5.9 million there that is additional staffing and non-staffing savings and efficiencies to be identified. So that was the commitment that we've made, and that was the commitment of the Board of Trustees, that's what we're going to be looking to do for the budget next year. So having said that, there are two options, which is what we wanted to discuss with you, and we need some direction so the director and I can start discussions with the ministry. So the first one is the one that is a compliant budget. A compliant budget means it's balanced, and we identify all the reductions all in 1 year. It requires board approval, does not require ministry approval. It will have the highest impact for 1 year, but at the same time, when we look at the cumulative impact, it would be less than the option number 2, and I'll explain that. And it, of course, aligns with the in-year deficit elimination plan that was approved. The second one is a non-compliant budget. That doesn't mean it's going to be over 1% deficit. $1 deficit will make it non-compliant. So this will mean that we would look at all of our permanent reductions that are structural deficit in nature and eliminate that. However, recognize that there's one-time investments that we need to make and continue to make into the system that we would like to make from accumulated surplus. So those one-time items, we would need to put them on a deficit elimination plan and request minister's approval to allow us to have a deficit budget. This would be a compromise if the minister would approve, but it would be a compromise where we would not have to have all the reductions in 1 year. We would split them over 2 years. Overall, the impact could be more exponential, where you have a reduction in this year and a bigger reduction next year than you would have had all in 1 year. Because, the dollar not saved today could mean more next year. So those are the two options for trustees to discuss, and I'd like to pause here and get some feedback, because this is your budget approval. It's our recommendation. The two, option number 2 is staff's recommendation. We've discussed this with the senior team and the director for months. And just looking at what we can find in savings and efficiencies and ideas as we're building it, it's a big number all in 1 year, and we're leaning more towards number 2. If we're leaning towards number 2, we need to inform the ministry right away to gauge the appetite, because we don't want in June to have a plan and ask for ministry approval, and then we don't receive it. We can't enact the budget. It means that we still have to find the savings for those other items that we have from surplus. So we have to inform the ministry's office as soon as possible, and that's where we need a bit of direction. If we are looking at number 2, and then we need to have that discussion with the ministry. So it's not all up to the Board of Trustees, but it will allow us to have a 2-year approach to balancing the budget. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation and the question. We have a speakers list, and we'll start with Carol.
Thank you, through the Vice Chair. I had a question, or just wondered if you could speak a little bit more about accumulated surplus and sort of what the intention is and the rules around that in the context of the school board. So is there a philosophy around how much surplus we're targeting? I know in some organizations, CRA recommends targeting 3 to 6 months of operating expenses. That's very different than this circumstance in which we're receiving government funding. Is there an expectation that the surplus should be a certain amount? I know looking at last year's balance sheets, the financial reports, the surplus was considerably higher than what was budgeted for. So I'm just wondering, are we targeting something and then occasionally end up with a little bit more? Has the ministry provided any guidelines around that? And would there be any exceptions for a board like ours where we have an accumulated surplus considerably higher than the average for Ontario, according to the Financial Accountability Office? So would the ministry look at us a little bit differently, let's say, than a board that does not have such a significant accumulated surplus? Thanks.
Excellent questions. And if I miss any, please let me know. So our accumulated surplus is about 58 million. That's what we're just pulling up right now. However, it's been internally appropriated by the Board of Trustees. So every year at the end of the year, we go through and we say, here's how we would like to spend it. We do, from a risk management perspective, the ministry does perform a risk health on each school board. They would like to see at least 2% of their provincial allocation in terms of unallocated, unencumbered deficit. And we have right now 10 million, so that's about 1.5 projected for the end of this year. That's unencumbered of the 58 million. And then we have 32 million that has been allocated. Those that were the only place for savings for a corporate office was from the underspendings of the board administration. So that has been set aside because this building is approaching within the next less than 5 years, I believe, prohibitive to repair, and there are some decisions to be made. So if we take that out of the equation, there's about 13 million remaining that has been set aside towards supporting the multi-year plan initiatives. And that's sort of what we've been drawing down, and a little bit of the unencumbered in order to support or compensate the funding from the ministry. We cannot continue at this pace. So even if, as treasurer, my recommendation, my preference would be number one, but I do understand that we are a service organization to our students, and it could be too significant in terms of reductions. So number two, what I would suggest is that we look at all of our structural deficit areas, and we try to come up with as many creative solutions that we can to be efficient and minimize the impact to the system as we do that. But there will be reductions. There won't be as much as in option one. And then the items where we can infuse into the system a one-time support to lessen the impact of the reductions, we would put them on that second year plan to reduce. So the ministry will look at us differently than they would look at the board that does not have. If they don't have resources, if they don't have an accumulated surplus, they're in trouble. So they wouldn't even have the option of not balancing. They would have to make some very difficult decisions. But at the end of the day, this is the first year of that regulation, and it just trumps everything that we've done before. So I'm not sure if I answered all your questions.
I think so. Thank you. It's just, like I said, to get the understanding what happens at a school board where, we don't really control our revenue.
Okay, Amy.
So I've lived through days of slash and burn budgets, and I would not like to see our board do that. I think the impact to students and staff and system would be extreme. I am particularly worried about students with special needs. We are significantly over budget every year on our spec eds funding, and yet whenever I attend or listen in on a SEAC meeting, I hear how much need is still out there. And I believe that we can do this. We shouldn't have to, but we can do this. But I would prefer us to do it in a gentler way. So I would go with option two. I think it's less harmful. I'm not going to say that it's not harmful, because it is, but it's less harmful.
Thank you. And Kelly.
Thank you. I don't even know what to say, because I've been with this board a long time, and we have never been in such dire straits. It's awful. And it's not all, or actually it's nothing to do with what we have done as a board. We have done the best we can to support all students, and we're not getting the funding to be able to do that. And this all started when they started clawing back funding for things like special ed and now transportation and all those other things. I must say I would prefer the second, because I, just as Amy has said, I don't want it to be so draconian that next year is awful. But we are going to have to make sure that all of our community, the parents, the students, everybody is aware of this, and that they also contribute to helping us determine what areas may need to be cut, because I'm sure they will come up with some areas. And some of them may be things that can't be cut because they don't understand, but I do think that there might be some good ideas that come out of that. I do have a question, and one of the slides really bothered me, the fact that we were the third lowest in using our money for our infrastructure, like to repair and stuff, and that we still are. And we have schools that are falling down, and we have schools that are not equitable across the system for providing the same education for all students. And we need our extra money to be able to help provide, to repair those schools. And I know the government doesn't really care because it's all about the ledger sheet, but we maybe need to be going out and making parents aware of what the differences are and make them understand that that's the only way we're going to get help. And we do have some things that we'll talk about through the end of the night of the fair funding, but I'm beside myself because you could see things happening, but I never thought we'd get to this point. So it just makes me sick to my stomach. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for keeping track of your time as you speak. Next is Margot.
I thought Robbie was first, so maybe take a name off the list. I don't know. My question is for option 2, which everybody seems to, can they say no? If we have to get ministry approval, can they say no?
Yes, they can say no. Yeah.
So regardless of what we want, I think it's really important that we ensure we have a full picture of what number 1 means, because they could say no.
Thank you for that, Robbie.
I'd add my support for option 2. I think it is preferable. One of the in the mobilization and the work that we're hoping to do in lifting up voices and applying some political pressure, that can't affect this year's budget. This year's budget is already locked in, but it can affect next year's budget. And we will be heading into an election in 2026. So there's the possibility that the GSN in 25-26 might look different. And a worst case scenario for us, if that did come through, is that we just cut $7 million out of our budget, and now we have to replace the people who we fired effectively, and we've lost the continuity. So in that circumstance, it would have been preferable to take an option 2 approach. I'm interested, Roxana, in the point that you alluded to in option 2 could require more cumulative cuts. And I would love to hear you draw that idea out a little bit further and whether we're talking about something marginal or something significant.
And thank you for that. And just to your first comment, you're absolutely right. The year before election, the grants could look very different. So it might be that second year of the plan will be up for discussion and seeing what that means. So yes. With regards to what I meant is, so if we have a pressure right now with declining enrollment, we'll have additional pressures with increasing inflation. Any cost remaining in our budget will cost more the following year. So it isn't a significantly more, but it could be different factors that will impact. So overall, we would have to take out more for every dollar out of our budget if we're going to be looking at multi-years, because the cost factor every year, whether it's tied to a collective agreement, whether it's tied to inflation, whether it's tied to different things that then they don't show up in the funding either. So now it's a bigger pressure for us. And some lost funding as well, right? From a declining enrollment will continue to put pressure. So does that answer your question? So it's not significant, it's not double the amount, but it will be more if we delay this, it will cost us more in the long term.
Okay, Jean.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just sitting here, just jot noting a few ideas, and that is, these are tough times right across the province, and in many respects, this whole news about our, having to make these tough decisions and change maybe the direction and reduce and try to find efficiencies. It couldn't come at a worse time. We've got right across Halton region and probably right across the province, all areas where parents are facing some significant tax increases. And so they're going to start to expect more. Like whenever you have to pay more, you expect more. And so again, they would have more expectations of the school system. But the needs continue to rise in the school system, the spec ed, the transportation. We're still getting out of having to address the rise in needs for the students who have been negatively affected by the experience of COVID. And so all of this couldn't happen it's like I feel like I'm in a snow globe. Just shake it up and let everything fly, because it just couldn't be a worse time. It's like a tsunami or a storm coming our way. And I'm not sure, I'm hearing around the room, well, let's go with number 2. It's kind of the least of the two evils, so to speak. I just don't know, but I recognize and I reflect too, with an election in the next couple of years coming up, you almost wonder if the government isn't saving money now to be able to dump out rich resources in the year leading up to the election. And you wonder if it isn't a strategic move on behalf of our government. My thinking, not this board's, but my thinking. Thank you.
Well, that's an interesting thought. And over to you, Donna. Donna? You might be on mute. Or maybe you're, there you are. We see you, but we can't hear you. Can't hear you. Would you like to text or log in again?
Or phone Amy.
Or phone Amy? Okay, in the meantime, I'll ask a question. Okay. My question is, for the 24-25 GSN, when would you be typically expecting it? And would knowing about it earlier help with selecting one of the two options? And if that's the case, what would be the ideal time frame to receive that GSN information?
So the typical time has been end of March to mid-April, and that's when we expect it. We do not expect it earlier, and we don't expect additional information in terms of what we'll be seeing in it. I think the information that is coming through right now is just the labor agreements that are being ratified and what that means in terms of continuing supports that for the staffing that are attached to them. Ideally, it would be, if we knew now, if we knew in January, that would match our staffing timelines. So end of March is too late. It's too late for us to have a plan. It's too late for us to start raising the requirement or support for the minister's approval for our plan. In speaking with my colleagues at the ministry, they have suggested to let them know as soon as possible. So by saying that we would do option 2, if that's the direction of the trustees, it doesn't mean that if we can do number 1, we wouldn't. It just leaves us the opportunity to have option 2. But if we don't start now, we may not receive approval from the ministry until October. So we wouldn't be able to implement the budget that we're proposing. So we would have to be cautious and implement the reductions up front, and then figure out if we can do the one-time items that we have identified.
So having heard what you've heard, are there any follow-up comments or questions to Roxana on that point? This point
Can
specifically?
you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. My apologies, I don't know what happened. I will be brief because I think my colleagues have all covered it extremely well and extremely eloquently. I wanted to express my support for option number 2 as well. I think it's the way to go. And a huge shout out and thank you to all of our financial staff. It's got to be so hard to come into work every day knowing that you're going to be asked to do more for less and trying to find all the savings. It's an incredible pressure for you to be under. And I know I speak for all of us when I say how much we appreciate that you're doing it. I like option number 2 because it does give us time to put some pressure on before the election if we need to, or just have those conversations. And I can say that at OPSPA, we will continue to push this conversation as well, not just at our regular OPSPA meetings, but at Advocacy Day again in next November. So hopefully we can get some momentum going. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And now we'll go to second-time speaker, Robbie.
Thank you. So with that timeline in mind, our timeline looked at budget approval at our final June meeting. You are consulting with the ministry now. Would the ministry pre-approve a non-compliant budget, or would we have to pass the budget, send it to the ministry, wait for their decision, and then potentially come back for a special meeting thereafter? Do we know anything about, I know it's a new regulation, do we know anything about what this process would look like?
Well, we'll be navigating that process together for the first time because we have not had to have ministry approval for any of the budgets before that I remember. What they are saying is that inform as soon as you can in terms of what your plan is and what do you think might be on the deficit elimination plan. So while we're still finalizing what that looks like, we can give them some broad themes in terms of these are the one-time items that we see required, and we're going to be identifying the rest inefficiencies. And as we have information, I would keep them informed. So when we have a good draft plan, which will be well before, it would be in May, we would submit that well in advance of the June approval.
And then we don't have a sense of what level of feedback we'd have from them.
I would hope they provide feedback from now until May. As we are providing them with information, I would expect that they would give us a bit of input in terms of whether they're completely not, there's no appetite to approve, or that it's something they would consider. But I couldn't tell you.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to our last question for this topic. Carol.
Thank you. Through the Vice Chair, I have one more question around data. So we've had a few conversations that indicate that the data that the ministry is using for Halton Region is out of date. And I'm just wondering, in your meetings, I know staff meet with ministry staff, whereas trustees don't. Have you presented some updated data, or do you have access to more updated data to show what that difference may be? And I don't know if there's specific types of demographic data that is of concern that would be outdated. But has that been a conversation where staff have presented to ministry staff, let's say, I'm not even sure what demographic points you're kind of thinking about that are being considered in the GSN, but it's this now based on Halton Region data, and what you're using from 2006 is this, and this is the difference and potentially the impact. Has that been a conversation, or is that data available?
That actually hasn't been presented. I would think we would have to get access to the 2021 census compared to the 2016 and 2006, I think they use, and then 2011. And so we haven't done that provincially.
But I would just add that it's also been applied to everybody, the data. as outdated as it is, it's been applied, right across the board. And so it impacts, everyone in the same way, although it would change for us in a positive way, we believe. But I don't think they're going to, use our data to address our specific issue. I think they would apply it right across the board. And so whenever it is that they're looking to do that as a province, I think we hope sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you very much, Roxana and Jay, for this presentation, and thank you for the excellent analysis of the data that you have done. I can imagine how onerous that job was. I think what really stands out is the comparator analysis that you've done to school boards that are similar to ours, and where you were able to see the show us how we rank with the overspending and underspending in the some of the key areas. I think that's very important information that we can carry on with, and particularly information that will help to support the work of the Fair Funding Ad Hoc Committee. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think we're well over time, so I will suggest that we'll do breakout sessions and discussions at the next committee meeting, and we'll just go ahead with proposing option 2.
Can I just ask one last question? Some of us have super council meetings coming up, and I wrote a note to myself about budget consultation with the public. It's starting to come out soon. I think I wrote a note
January
here.
29th, we'll launch the survey.
That's right.
And
February
we're hoping
19th.
to go to pick, I think it's February 8th. Just looking for the date, but.
So when the surveys launch, how do parents in our communities know about it?
It's going to be submitted through School Messenger to our families. It's going to be on social media and news release and so forth. So, we also reach out to student senate for our student trustees. We have a whole distribution for the survey, but we're also doing the presentations in addition to the survey.
I just recall last year, if I'm right, we had fewer people respond, and it would be really nice if all of us could pump it up and try and promote involvement of our parent community in this budget consultation process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will now move on to item 4.0, committees. With standing committees, an update from Carol on the professional development.
Sorry. Thank you, through the Vice Chair, to all trustees. So I sent out today by email a written report, which is just a brief outline of what the committee has done since we were formed from the striking committee process in November. So we've had 2 meetings. As you know, there are 4 members of the committee. 2 are returning from last year and 2 of us are new. Our first order of business was to look at the professional development that we approved for 2023 and just see if there was anything outstanding that we should ensure was completed. And the first item that we found from previous reports was the special education professional development. So that has been partially fulfilled in that, as you will remember, trustees had a PD session that was provided by Superintendent Reddick about special education in the board. And the second component that trustees had intended was to reach out to the members of SEAC, the association members, to get some feedback on their views on special education as it pertains to the students with exceptionalities that they represent. So that request has been made, and the intention is that the standing committee will report back to the board when we've received some feedback to share. As you know, the governance training has been planned and booked, and I think everyone has now confirmed their attendance, so that's great, at the end of February. There's some strategic planning PD that's being planned and facilitated through the MYP steering committee. So this year we've got multiple sort of players, as you might want to say, working on PD because we are in the MYP process. So we have our first session on January 31st. The second order of business for the committee is to start planning for 2024. So that's where we'll be reaching out to everyone to ask for some input and some priorities. So I will be sending out a survey, or the committee, after we've completed it, we'll be sending out a survey to everyone to ask what your thoughts are on some of the priorities that we've identified as a committee, and obviously a blank space to fill in anything that's missing that might be desired by trustees. And then one more thing I think everyone might be aware is that Manager Khan has created a spreadsheet that helps support planning that has all of the PD that trustees will be attending, and also lists potential dates for PD sessions that we had reserved in our calendars for board meetings that have now been canceled. So that's a great tool, and we say thank you to Manager Khan for that, for keeping us organized. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Carol and the committee? Seeing none, okay, we will move on to ad hoc committees, and the first being an update from Jean on the Inspire Awards.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to the committee members. The committee members, as in the report you would have seen, would be Naveed and Amy, Joanna, Tanya, and 4 student trustees. How about that? With the input last spring through Ethan and Cindy, and since then, of course, through Sultan and Sharina. The committee members have done amazing work, and they continue to do amazing work as we continue to fine-tune some of the policies and other documents that we're working on. Especially want to thank those committee members who were able to add their eagle eye to some of these documents and pick off and improve the document. Every time I go in and look at the work of some of the people that have been actively working on this document from the committee, it gets stronger and stronger every time. I need to thank the communication and engagement department. That's Andrew and Heather, Jason and Amy. They've all been working in the background to support the work of this committee as well. And of course, the central key person for all of us, Susan Thrasher, in the director's office. So I want to thank also recently to the trustees who forwarded to me some photos of their recent presentations of awards, because that's a help, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So just recently I did share my committee report to you. I know, Xingyi, you had difficulty opening it up. I just resent it to you. I wonder if you have a chance. You got it. Great. Okay. I just want to be high level, quick to show some of the differences. As we move forward with the Inspire Award, the committee is recommending that we move away from a scoring system to a yes or no system, one that is based on a little bit different criteria that speaks again to the supporting student achievement and well-being, but criteria that is defined by giving recognition to individuals or groups associated with the HDSBs who support student achievement and well-being by taking these 3 actions. One, that they inspire others, that their inspiring activities have had a positive and lasting impact, and most importantly, that in doing so, they've gone above and beyond. It's not been part of their duties or part of their job or whatever, but they've gone above and beyond. So the yes or no will provide us with some pretty good efficiencies in moving forward. To that end, I have pages of ideas that came from the committee, and we've got most of them nailed down. Examples like giving exemplars on our website. This is what a successful application would look like. And there was one that was created and circulated to the committee members just recently for an individual who volunteered for a food program. I think we need to put a few more exemplars in there, but that's a start. The promotional video, I think it was shared to everyone. No. Okay. Because it's still being worked on. In that promotional video, just for those of you that haven't seen it yet, there is a spot where it pans away from Srina and Sultan to show 3 photos. And that's why we requested some of the photos, because in our current draft of the video, it shows a photo of a past trustee from our last term. We felt that let's bring it forward and, work with the folks that we have. However, there's been a hiccup, just newly discovered hiccup on these photos. And that is, though we have asked for the permission of folks to photograph them and use them in social media, Susan Thrasher does not believe that we have really asked them for permission to put them in a video. And so I'm going to have to work through some of you that have sent me photos. We may need to reach out, and I only need 3 with permission, but to 3 different individuals to reach out to see that they're okay with their image being used in a video. So that was a little bit of a hiccup. Governance documents, I'll just go through that. It's in the report. We've got the board policy, governance procedure, and admin procedure. They've all been worked on by our committee. I think they're getting closer and closer to being ready. In fact, I think they are ready to go to the governance committee for their eyes on it so that we can move it forward and begin to initiate these changes to our award. The HDSB website changes are required to the information page, the nomination form, the evaluation guideline, and the Q&A section, all being worked on, almost all done. And so they're just waiting for that to come out. Other changes that came by way of the committee's work were nailing down and solidifying some of the philosophical decisions around who could be nominated, who receives certificates and how presentations are made at the board. And also the fact that we now have the co-chairs doing an initial scan of those nominations coming in so that immediately those that really look like they're going to need more information to go anywhere are immediately sent back to the nominators so that we can try to get them caught up and into consideration for the awards. All in all, to say, folks, what seemed like a, pretty easy task, it's had layers and, corners and curves and all the rest of it. And it's taken a long time to get to where we are. But as you can see in the chart that I provided, in the report that I circulated, you see the status on everything from all of our different policies and procedures to nomination and HDSB website documents. So they're all being, very close to being done. I continue, however, as I say, every time I open up my documents, more eagle eyes have been carving their way through the documents and improving them and making them more solid. So again, I thank everyone for that. But we do need to come to an end soon and decide this is what we'll be happy to go with. And I was hoping to kind of wrap it up by maybe the end of the month. However, I do have a question, and that concludes my report, but I do have a question of the governance committee. I would think that this has to really be passed through a board or through the trustees before we can enact it. So question asked.
When this motion came to the board to create the ad hoc committee, was the direction that it would come to board, or was it the direction that it would go through the governance committee? Because I don't think that the direction on that motion was for it to go through the governance committee. That doesn't mean we couldn't take the time to put our eyes on it, and I'll leave that up to Robbie. But I'm going back in my mind to when we actually passed this motion, which was before Robbie became a trustee. And I don't think we asked for it to go through governance.
No, we did not.
So that's not required, but if you would like our input, we could provide it.
Perfect, thank you. So again, we'll be trying to finalize it, and I've been running everything through the committee, and I'm sure they're getting tired of seeing all the shared documents coming their way every night, but we're getting really, really close. But I see Tanya has a question.
Yes, go ahead, Tanya.
So it's more of a comment and question. So the motion that was passed earlier last year, and I'm looking at it because it's included in your report, so thank you for that. It said to develop recommendations, yada, 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 and present them to the board. So the idea is, does it have to go through the governance document review committee? No, but the recommendations are to come to the board. But by being on the committee, I know that some of the recommendations do impact policy, do impact the governance procedure. So at some point, we have to get the policy and procedure approved first so that all the recommendations we're making can actually be enacted. And so one of the things where all of the items are being sent for review and commenting, is this poster good? Is this video good? Yeah, but what happens if the policy as presented doesn't get approved, or that there's further discussion and, you know, the majority don't like something that's being recommended? So it's almost, I feel like we've put the cart before the horse, and we're making all these changes without getting the green light. And I know it's been a year that we've been working on this, but I think that before we finalize any nomination forms, any criteria guidelines, any videos, I think it'd be really important for us to approve the policy, approve the governance procedure, because there is language in there that will impact all of the documents that we're working on.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And those two documents are ready for the governance committee. They're already had been worked on at least 2 to 3 weeks ago. They're in a final stage, ready for. And then I guess if the governance committee has eyes on, then eventually, then we need to book time in a board meeting, or maybe the next committee of the whole. I'm not sure, to have further discussions and nail it down. If that's the case, then we would be on a delay. We were looking for a February 1st launch, but maybe we're on a delay and looking at a March 1st launch. Doesn't matter. We're in good stead. We've got everything ready to go, and we continue to march along using the great system that we are now changing. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Carol.
Thank you. Through the Vice Chair, a quick question. I know it's late. I don't want to be that person who comes asking a question near the end of the process, but I wonder if the committee considered when awards are presented at all. And I had this thought recently. We always do the Inspire Award presentations at a board meeting, the first board meeting of the month. And by necessity, our board meetings are business meetings, and sometimes there's contentious things that we're deciding on, and the mood in the room is not super festive, depending on what the agenda is. And I'm not saying that that's wrong in any way. That's what doing the business of the board means. So I'm wondering, has it ever been considered to present Inspire Awards maybe a little bit less often, but at a dedicated night? In an environment that would be a little bit more festive, I guess, for lack of a better word, and which would allow for some mingling of the award recipients and trustees. And I'm just thinking of some times where we've had award presentations, and I would have loved to go and chat with the person, who had received award, who's not from my area. And wouldn't it be great if we had a little bit of a reception after? So I'm just wondering if that's ever been talked about. I know I'm new, or if that was considered at committee, or if it's something that trustees would be interested in exploring. Thank you.
I could respond, but then I'd look to around the room for others that have been around longer or as long. I think that we had some conversation about that. I'm hearing or seeing nods rather, and it didn't really fly. But I can't remember the reasons why it wasn't flying. And I looked at Joanna and Amy, and then probably Donna is out there in Cyberland, and she's probably doing the same nods.
Okay, would you like to speak?
Yes, she is. We actually
Donna.
We did actually used to do it as a dedicated evening twice a year. And it was very, very well attended. People did enjoy it. We moved to the board meeting to see if it might be more accessible to people to honor them on a regular basis. We have done it both ways. I would say that both have been quite successful. But I know I personally did really enjoy when we had those 2 nights per year, but I don't know how anybody else might feel about it. But that was our original process, was to do it in a specific evening twice a year.
I can add on to what Donna said there. Prior to the Inspire Awards, there was a different brand of award. The Inspire Awards came out, I guess, about 10 years ago, right? So before that, there was these other awards, and there actually used to be SEAC awards as well, and they went by the by. They actually stopped doing them. And they stopped doing them at around the time they had moved from having special nights to making those things twice a year. And because it was requiring a lot of staff presence and us finding a central place, a location to have the awards. And then they tried to do them regionally a couple of times. And then the entire awards system kind of got suspended. And I think it was actually Kelly who asked for the board to reconsider bringing back an award. And then this, during that whole conversation, it became we should merge the SEAC awards in there too and make it one award, and doing it at the board office was thought to be the best way to go, because this is an award that is given by trustees. And so requiring staff's presence in order for us to have a special meeting at a special place twice a year seemed to be counterintuitive. And so we went with the idea of once a month in the board meetings. And then that morphed into, well, not everyone wants them in the board meetings, so we can, it's been through a lot of iterations, but I think we've landed at a place where we know our recipients are comfortable receiving their award wherever and whenever they choose to. The thing is, they get to choose, and that is the most important part for me. They get to choose, and they even get to choose whether or not their name is read out loud, which is wonderful, because some people really value their privacy. I really like the way that this has morphed, and I appreciate the options that we give to the recipients to get their award in the manner that they choose.
And I would actually argue this is business of the board. We are recognizing and celebrating those people in our system and outside the system who are supporting students. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. So, and as Amy said, we have morphed so that we're celebrating here as well as other places. And let me tell you, when we used to celebrate here and when it became something that was celebrated once or twice a year, trustees didn't show up, people didn't show up to receive the awards. It was a nightmare and didn't happen. So,
Okay, thank you for this discussion. Amy, do you still have a question on the topic? Question to Jean on Inspire Awards.
I'm sure I still do. I just can't remember what it was. I will.
Okay, thank you, Jean, for that wonderful update. The Inspire Awards were originated in the 2014-2018 term, and so it's great to see that the process continues to evolve and we continue to make improvements. And I think we all enjoy those evenings where we get to meet our partners and stakeholders and celebrate their contributions to the well-being and achievement of our students. That's wonderful. Sorry, Tanya, I missed you on the list there.
No worries. So realizing that there's this desire to get this program rolled out sooner rather than later. Do we think that the policy and the GP could come to the board meeting in February for approval so that we could have the month of February to work on all the materials so that the program can be rolled out sooner rather than later?
Robbie?
This is an amendment to policy, and as such needs to come to board twice. So it actually would need to go, if we want it approved in February, you would need to submit it tomorrow to Carolina to be on the agenda at board next week, and then come again in February. Amy, you may think I'm wrong.
No, that's just...
I'm really not going according to this, the chair of this committee. I feel like I'm speaking out of turn a lot. So because we've been to committee of the whole tonight, that counts as one meeting. We have been discussing the GP and the policy, not the paper of them, but we have been discussing the content of them. And so that could conceivably count as one meeting.
We can always waive the rules.
And yes, we can also suspend the rules. It does count as a meeting. It's been on the agenda. We've discussed it.
We don't know what is being proposed. So part of presenting an amendment would be to say, this is what we're proposing to change. We would have that discussion, and then yes, that would consider its first appearance. But no one else knows what's being proposed as changes, so this doesn't count as the first appearance.
So what I'm hearing is we need...
Did you not send a copy to everyone?
The policy document, no.
Okay.
No, it was still wheeling through.
I stand corrected. I thought everyone had received it.
Yeah, but the next move from me is to Robbie, and hopefully Robbie's committee would soon be able to, give a thumbs up so that we could get it to the next. Was it this week that we would have to get it to Carolina?
Tomorrow.
Could I?
Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you, through the chair. So yes, it would be quite tight to get it through the submission deadline for next week's board agenda. However, we do have a board meeting on February 7th. So it could be the case that if the board wishes to suspend the rules to not have two presentations for that, then that could be incorporated into the recommendation of the report at that time.
Okay.
Thank you. I will work with Robbie in making sure that we have that look, and then it moves forward. Thank you.
Okay, and I have Robbie on the list. Nope. Okay, so we're done. And Jean has a game plan. All right, wonderful. Moving on to our final item under committees, and that's the update from fair funding, with chair of that being...
Thank you very much. This is very timely, as we all saw the budget presentation by Roxana earlier this evening, and how needed the advocacy around this is needed to be. So the first item is terms of reference, and Joanna's going to speak to that.
Okay, thank you. So as we all appreciate, HDSB has been always very efficient. And in the words of our Roxana, we're doing more with less. In fact, we're doing with 20 million less based on our comparisons to our competitor school boards. So being cognizant that our school board is responsible for educating and is instrumental in shaping young Ontarians, future leaders, professionals, skilled tradespeople, global citizens. It is in the interest of everyone that we have a robust and well-funded public education system. And so, investments in education must be made. They are critical to the future of our students and Ontario in overall. And so the terms of reference are in front of you, and it is the purpose of this Fair Funding Committee to raise awareness about how DHDSB is funded and the repercussions of reductions to provincial education funding. So the committee will create a plan of action that will be shared with you, and we will be responsible for working with fellow trustees in executing this plan. Members of the committee are Kelly as the chair, Robbie and myself, and we thank Superintendent Nagoy for her assistance in supporting us with the documentation, with the data, with the analysis that is required to drive our key messages to our public, especially our key stakeholders. And so I will pass it on back to Kelly.
Thank you. And I know, Tanya, you had a question around the action plan. Well, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, to tell you what it is and then how we can get everyone involved. We didn't have an action plan in place when we created the terms of reference. So I don't know if that helps. First of all, I'd like to thank Roxana very much for all of her help, because she is the encyclopedia of knowledge and she's able to answer our questions and help us figure out the direction that we need to go. And so we couldn't do it without you. So thank you so very much. Kevin, can you put that, do I have to work it off that computer? Are you going to do it, Robbie? Okay. So Robbie's going to talk about the first part around our key messages.
So what you got in front of you is our kind of running notes, and my apologies, this is very, very rough. But the two chunks that we'll talk about are what we think are the key messages, and then more about what the engagement strategy is, and we'd love your feedback on both of those things. So first and foremost, message to the public is funding is not keeping up with costs. And this is a straight RGSN allocation adjusted for inflation, and you can see where it's headed over the last 4 or 5 years. And that is why we are in the bind we are in. The story from there is there's a new rule in place that says even though we have a surplus, we're required to balance our budget. Without significant changes to the GSN, that's going to mean cuts. That's going to mean cuts to service. That's the consequence of the graph that we just saw up above. There are some key gaps. There are places where there's extra pressure. The CPP and EI enhancement, special education, transportation, supply staff costs, all those things that Roxana talked about. Those are kind of 4 places where we can hold up. This is specifically where funding is falling short. And then the final point, that in many areas funding is enveloped and can't be moved around. And so where there are gaps to make up, they come from a limited number of places, particularly around the physical infrastructure of schools. That's the only place that we can significantly dip into to provide those classroom supports. In more technical conversations, in places where if we're meeting with MPPs or with civil servants, raising the question about the old data being used and some of the consequences that may have, and then the cash management strategy, and saying here's if you're looking for simple ways to support the board, this is actually a way. If you gave us our money, that would eat up that would deal with a chunk of the deficit. So that's what we see as the key messaging in what we'd be taking forward. And then from there, the engagement plan starts to talk about A, who we're talking to, and B, what we are asking of them.
So, do you want to just roll it up? Okay, so we divided it into 3 different categories. So the HDSB community, the MPPs and the government, and the other school boards, OFSPA, code, and otherwise. So we've just done some brainstorming, and that's where we would like your input about other areas that you think might help us. And we're going to ask for your help in reaching out to some of these different places through your family of schools and the school councils and other areas. But so through the HDSB, we're going to be working with Heather Francie to try and create some type of a information flyer about information. Again, I said the fact that we're the lowest or second lowest funded has nothing to do with this anymore. It's about the fact that we're not getting funded the way we need to, and that there's a gap between what our students need and what we are receiving. And the fact that simple things such as Robbie talked about, that we're not getting the funding for the CPP and the EI enhancements. We have to pay for it, even though it's mandated. The government's not giving us the money to pay that to staff. So, and there's other areas such as that. We've written some ideas here about who we have to reach out to, including SEAC and PIC. We also thank Jean and Donna for already contacting Ted Arnott, and I'm starting a conversation with him, who has volunteered to try and pull the MPPs together. So we just really need to have that meeting with the MPPs to tell to them about the issues and to demonstrate and to provide potential solutions or recommendations. We would like to provide an invitation to the minister to come and talk to us, and so that we could have that conversation. And then we have other opportunities, such as take your MPP to work school week and share other messages while visiting and touring a school. So OPSPA, we believe, is a key piece of this that we would need ask them to have joint advocacy with the and share the information with other boards. We will reach out to the other boards as well. But I mean, because we're all in the same boat, it's not just us anymore who are in this situation. We need to come together. We all need to share the same message. So, and maybe OFSPA could even strike a provincial committee to look at the GSN, something like that. We're just doing some brainstorming. We threw in thoughts such as maybe we need to reach out to local colleges and universities, because we know they're having problems as well. There's also the provincial associations such as CODE and WASPO, and maybe a direct conversation with our coterminous board, who is in the same situation in Halton, and get everyone in Halton enraged by this. Anyways, so we've gone through some learning and understanding around this whole piece. And so we're going to ask each of these groups to participate, and we're going to try and make it simple, maybe create a script for parents, depending on how this all turns out. But we need to have the parent voice. Their voices are the one, especially with an election coming up, that will make the difference. Our voices, as we know, we can write as many letters as we want. We don't even get responses half the time. So we need to get the parents involved, because they're the people who will vote them back in if that's what they really want, which we all know they do. So anyways, that's a brief overview. We're welcome and looking for feedback about what else can we do. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so you have the action plan in front of you, and I believe Kelly shared that with all of us at some point in the... No, you have not? Okay. Okay. Is that... Okay. So in the interest of time, may I suggest that Kelly share that, and everybody please take some time in the next couple of days to have a look and see if there's anything missing or if you have any other suggestions or tweaks to what we were proposing. The committee will be making recommendations to the board by February 20 of this year, and yes, and the action plan is something that will drive, how we proceed, and how we support each other in getting the messages out. And I'm starting a speakers list. Please be mindful of time. I have Jean and then Robbie.
Just a thought that I think 8 of the 11 of us will be gathered next week in Toronto. We may have an opportunity to have a huddle and think tank together on one of the breaks or one of the opportunities that presents itself while we're in the city.
And Robbie.
Specific question I'd like you to sit with is in your interactions with people locally in your area, whether that's through Super Council or otherwise, what would be useful as a toolkit, if you will, as the material that you would use to both make the case and ask for their support. And so just anything that you can think about to crystallize what do you need in your hands to be able to walk out and make that ask, make that ask.
Thank you, Robbie. And feel free to put those ideas into the action plan under maybe a separate heading so that we can all see that and have access to it and work with it. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to trustee questions and comments. Are there any for tonight? Is Robbie finished? Okay, Tanya.
Yes, I have a question. Who is the chair of the board self-assessment committee? And is that committee, so whoever the chair is, might be able to answer my question. Robbie? Okay. Okay. So my question is, how or when is the committee going to share with all of us what it is that we're going to assess ourselves against at the end of the year? Because if we're going to assess, it would be great to know this is what we're assessing on. Let's discuss. And then when October comes and we have to do an assessment, that we're very clear on what we're measuring ourselves against. So when's it coming?
Okay, so I'll start and then Robbie, you can chime in. The committee will be meeting next week and we will be taking a look at the results of the previous assessment that was done. We will be looking at the assessment tool itself and we'll be considering whether there are other types of assessment tools that we should be considering and how do we go forward. So that will all be discussed at the next committee meeting. So, thank you. Jean.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to share some exciting news from the Hills, and I share it with the thought that you may want to follow this idea in your own respective area. I reached out to Superintendent Connor and Director Ennis before Christmas in relation to having spoken to Mayor Lawler in Halton Hills with the thoughts of us making an appearance at a Halton Hills Council meeting. And I pitched that we would bring exciting new developments in the Halton Hills schools, the current challenges and opportunities in education, and then a look to the future. And I was very pleased that Director Ennis and Superintendent Connor has agreed to make this appearance at a Halton Hills Council meeting, but also to bring that information forward. We did this about 4 or 5 years ago. Andrea Grabentz and Scott Podger-Barrick and Stuart Miller was involved, and it paid great dividends in building and strengthening the relationship that the HDSB had with our own Halton Hills Council. So it's just a kind of a nice way of, keeping them close and having them be more aware of what's happening in the area as it relates to schools. And so I just would recommend that. And I'm looking at the mayor's last correspondence to me, and she is working through her admin assistants to get a date for us in the spring sometime. So I look forward to bringing more information about that when it happens, but just wanted to plant that seed or thought for all of you tonight.
Thank you, Jean. That sounds like a wonderful idea and an excellent opportunity. So we'll definitely be considering. Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have exhausted the agenda, and I call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. And